into audio.
Okay. Yeah, I know they were working on fixing an echo in the room.
Yeah, we are trying to fix the echo. Do you hear it
Great.
when we talk, or is it just when you speak to us?
Nope, I can hear you okay. For a while, it looked like you guys could not hear us on us talking here. But as long as you can hear us now, that's a good thing.
You can see I moved
Hey,
the
Della.
Oreos. So you can see I moved the Oreos.
No future divisions.
No, don't want to tempt you. I had to put them out of reach from myself. So
Understandable. Yeah, there's not enough willpower in the world when it comes to me and Oreos. And Della, they're just working on a audio issue in the room there. Sounds like they've just got some echo thing going on.
okay.
But otherwise, sounds like it's been working okay. They can see the screen share and they can hear us okay.
All right. And how many are there?
I believe Sheila, John, and I didn't ask for the third attendee so far.
Hi, this is Jeff Weiss from the DNR. I can hear and see you just fine.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jeff.
Mm-hmm.
Staying warm today?
Oh yeah, I have a space heater here that kind of blows under my desk on my feet a little bit.
Wise.
Couldn't do that if I was in the office. That's not allowed.
I played hard to get with the space heater for way too long. It is game changing.
Oh yeah. Well, my desk, like you can see with the sun here, my desk is right in front of two windows, so it gets a little bit chilly coming off of it.
Yep.
So, you know.
Makes sense.
Jeff, what is it like having another Jeff Weiss at the DNR?
Oh man, we have fun with it.
I just sent him a message. I just sent him one. Let's say I'm on a call with another Jeff Weiss.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my email is Jeffrey. So
okay.
We get emails crossing all the time, and we have fun with it. It's like I think this was for you, you know. But we knew each other before he came to when he was with Bar.
Okay.
And stuff too. So yeah. I was actually got an email string with his supervisor Jenny the other day, and I signed my email Jeff, and then behind it I put clean water. And she sent me a smiley face.
The other Jeff.
So yeah, definitely. So that's been fun.
We've been having naming conversations in the office because I have a Jennifer, and I guess it was a very popular name in the 70s and the early 80s. So she said when she was in school, there had to have been like 5 or 10 of them. Jenny, Jen. Yeah. Always good times. I never had an issue. There aren't too many Dellas running around.
welcome to those that are joining. Just giving it a few couple of extra minutes for people to find the Zoom links and find their way here. I just feel like we need like lobby music in Zoom.
Can you, Rachel, could you hear us chattering just a minute ago?
We could not, nope.
Okay, we're still learning our microphone system. I think we got it now though.
Awesome.
So you can hear me, right?
Yeah, I can hear you great, Sheila. Alrighty, and Sheila, it looks like we're getting to establishing an equilibrium with people jumping in on the Zoom meeting link.
Okay, sounds good.
So I can go ahead and share my screen if that sounds okay to you, Sheila.
Did you want me to start or initiate question or introductions?
Yeah, if you want to
Okay.
start with the round of intros, I think that would be fantastic. Thank you, Sheila. And we can go actually to, let me just pop up the agenda so people know where they're at. There we are. We can start with a quick round of introductions if people are willing.
Okay, thanks. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sheila Harms. I'm the coordinator for the WinLaC One Watershed, One Plan. It's a group of 10 local government entities that are working together to develop a watershed-based plan for the Mississippi River, Winona, and La Crescent watersheds. And so this meeting today is a combination meeting between the planning work group, which is the staff for each of these entities, as well as the advisory committee meeting. And those were a list of individuals or entities that we asked to join us to help us flesh out this watershed plan. And so I think we'll get started with introductions here in the Winona City Council chambers. That's where I am attending, and we have two others here with us, and they can introduce themselves, and then we'll go to the online individuals.
Good afternoon. My name is Glenn Groth, farm outside of Winona, and representing Winona County Farm Bureau.
Hello, this is John Howard. I work for the city of Winona. I'm the Natural Resource and Sustainability Coordinator here.
All right, and that's everybody in person there, Sheila? Okay, I think she said yes. Oh, we got one other person join here.
I'm Glenn Haig, farmer up by Lewiston.
Oh, great. All right, thank you all. Just by way of helping with the long list of folks that are joining us remotely, I can just call first the names that I'm seeing on the Zoom for you to have a chance to jump off of mute and introduce yourself if you are interested in the organization that you're representing. So just to introduce myself first, my name is Rachel Olm. I'm the project manager with Houston Engineering that's helping to write this plan in collaboration with the WinLaC Planning Work Group and you as the advisory committee. So thank you all for being here. Great to see so many people. I will turn it over to Della.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Della Shaw-Young with Young Environmental Consulting Group, and we're supporting Houston Engineering with providing facilitation assistance.
And next I've got David Ruff.
Hi, David Ruff with the Nature Conservancy.
Great, thank you. And Mark.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Mark Vanderlinden with the Minnesota Land Trust.
Thank you. And Bonnie.
Thank you. Bonnie Haugen, grazing dairy farmer, doesn't have to milk anymore, from Canton, Minnesota.
Thanks, Bonnie. And Caitlin.
Hi everyone, Caitlin Brady. I'm the Water Resources Coordinator for Homestead Soil and Water Conservation District.
And Jason Ludwigson. Sorry.
Jason Ludwigson, Sustainability Coordinator for the City of Crescent.
Thank you. And next we have Kay.
Quality Planning and Environmental Services Director, Winona County.
Thanks, Kay. And Megan.
Hi, I'm Megan Pavely, planner with Winona County.
Thanks, Megan. Heidi.
Hi, everyone. I wear two hats. I am a fish habitat biologist with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and I also coordinate Fishers and Farmers Partnership.
Thanks, Heidi. Terry Peters.
Hi, I'm Terry Peters. I'm with the Wabasha Soil and Water Office.
And Emily.
Hey everyone, I am Emily Zanone. I'm with Minnesota Pollution Control Agency based out of Rochester, and I am a watershed project manager.
Thanks, Emily. And Shayna.
Hi everybody, Shayna Keesley. I'm a clean water specialist with the Board of Water and Soil Resources out of the Rochester office.
Sadie.
Hi, my name is Sadie. I am here to observe today. I am a Minnesota Green Corps member serving with the city of Rochester and a resident of Winona.
Awesome. All right, sorry with the square is shifted on me here. Meg, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm Meg Gamage Tucker, the CEO of the National Eagle Center. Nice to meet you all, and thank you for letting me join.
Great. Thanks, Meg. And next we have Janice. And Janice with the root, oh, it looks like no microphone. Janice, if you'd like to introduce yourself via chat, let me make sure we've got that function here. Please feel free to do so. Della, would you be willing to see if you have access to a chat function?
I do not. I have been looking for it and I don't see it. So
okay.
I'm
no problem.
continuing to look for it.
Okay. I know we had that that issue last time too, so no worries. All righty. That leads us to Dawn.
I am Dawn Bernal with the Minnesota Department of Ag in the Southeast, the Rochester office, and I'm getting low bandwidth messages, so I'm probably going to keep my video off.
No problem. Thanks, Don.
Yep.
And Jeff.
Hi, I'm Jeff Weiss. I'm a clean water hydrologist with the DNR in Rochester.
Thanks, Jeff. And Skip.
Hey, good afternoon. Skip Langer, Homestead Soil and Water Conservation District.
And Adam Bielke.
Good afternoon. I'm Anna Bielke, board conservationist with the Board of Water and Soil Resources out of Rochester.
Thanks, Adam. Amanda.
Amanda Gentry with the Winona County Soil and Water Conservation District.
Perfect. Thanks, Amanda. And last one, I've got a J.A. Edward.
That's Jamie Edwards. I'm the manager of the Whitewater Wildlife Management Area.
Thank you, Jamie. All righty. Are we missing anybody else that I didn't call on yet? Okay. We've got a metaphorically full room here. So thank you all very much for spending so much of your valuable time here today to talk about the Winona-La Crescent One Watershed One Plan. I'll go back to the beginning of the presentation here. We've got a lot to go over as you saw in the agenda. Maybe I'll just start with a quick overview there. And as Della introduced, we'll be facilitating this meeting using a combination of Sheila in person in the Winona City Council chambers, myself, as well as Della as our lead facilitator. The other wing to our consultant partnership working on helping to throw together the WinLaC One Watershed One Plan is St. Mary's University of Minnesota, who has been helping us behind the scenes with geospatial work and map creation process. So just as a quick introduction there, I'd love to move on to just an overview about what you can expect to in the next 3 hours of your time here today in this virtual meeting. We'll be spending a little bit of time just going over a quick overview of One Watershed One Plan. We recognize a lot of the names here that are on the call today from the last advisory committee meeting when we were talking about priority issues. But there are some new faces, so we want to spend at least a minute or two of that valuable time making sure that we're at least all entering under the same understanding about what the heck this thing is. Then we'll go into our second agenda item, which is the overview of the priority issues, kind of picking up from where you left off in November. Want to make sure that we're circling back and showing you what the policy committee approved as priority issues for this plan. Then we'll be moving over to what you see is the vast majority of our time here today. We'll be working through what was a pretty mammoth amount of material in your meeting packets. I know it was about 40 pages worth of content. If you got through any of it, fantastic, good on you. But we'll be spending quite a bit of time today making sure that we're walking through it as a group, and we will be asking for your feedback. Recognizing sometimes that's challenging in a remote place, we're just going to be really encouraging folks to jump off of mute and engage during that part of our agenda item. We'll be rounding out with just some next steps. Sheila can provide an update on We Are Water, as can John, who are in person. And we'll just spend a minute or two talking about our next civic engagement piece of the puzzle, which is the waterside chats. So before we jump into the weeds, does anybody have any questions about how we're going to be using our time here today? All right. If not, I can jump right in here. We already did a quick round of introductions, but just so folks are aware, the WinLaC One Watershed One Plan boundary area here, as shown by the map put together by St. Mary's, is a combination of Winona, Olmsted, Wabasha, and Houston counties. It is inclusive of those counties as well as SWCDs, the City of Winona, and the Stockton, Rolling Stone, Minnesota City Watershed District. So if you're not sure where we're talking about in the state, that's just shown on the map just by way of orientation. The committee that most of you are serving here is the advisory committee, but we also have a joint meeting here today with the planning work group. The purpose of the planning work group is they're the local government staff and some state agency staff that is really developing plan content in order for you, the advisory committee, to react to and provide your subject matter expertise before it moves up to the policy committee. So your input as an advisory committee is critical. The meeting today is a little bit unique because there is some material that the planning work group hasn't even seen yet either. So there is some fresh material that everybody's going to be reacting to that's brand new. A quick overview about what One Watershed One Plan is in the event that you weren't able to attend our last advisory committee meeting. This is a statewide program to transition local water planning efforts from county jurisdictional and watershed district boundaries over to the major watersheds, kind of following the 10-year watershed approach style of water quality and water resource management. And it also is in an effort to ensure that water planning is mirroring how water moves over the landscape. It's different from other local planning efforts that you may have been involved with over the years, because at the end of this 2-year planning process, the WinLaC planning group is going to have an opportunity to, is going to have the door open to non-competitive state clean water fund dollars in order to fund conservation action on the landscape. So once the plan is approved, they are eligible to receive that biennial allocation of funding in order to improve the resources that get focused on as part of this plan. It's also a living, breathing plan. The group will be revisiting the plan every year in their annual work planning efforts as well. And as I mentioned, this is about a 2-year or so planning process. We're starting to get to the second milestone here with the planning work group. So we're really kind of past this first milestone of introducing and prioritizing some of the issues that this plan will be focusing on. We're doing a little bit of geographic prioritization in order to wrap up that milestone before we move into establishing plan goals. The next milestone that we'll be talking about is what we want to do in order to tackle the goals that we've identified as important. And this third milestone here in this yellow box, you'll notice today we're actually going to start asking you some of those questions today as well. We want to hear from you about what's important, what type of actions you want to consider in the next 10 years. Then we'll be turning the corner to this planning process to start talking about implementation programs, the fiscal buckets that get used to fund the plan, before moving to an internal formal review and finally a final plan. You as an advisory committee can expect to see outcomes from each of these milestones as the planning work group wraps them up by way of draft plan sections. So you will see components of the plan come through as they get developed as well. All right. Any questions, comments, or concerns related to just that quick overview about One Watershed, One Plan and your role as the advisory committee? All righty, and if not, we can just move into this overview of priority issues. So I'll begin starting the discussion about these plan priority issues, and then I'll be passing the baton to our facilitator, Della, to walk through the priority issues established. So our goal today in reviewing these priority issues is we want to review the process of how we got here, just as a reminder. So want to remind everybody about how we identified the priority issues, and that list of comprehensive priority issues that we collaboratively developed with you, the advisory committee, the planning work group, the policy committee, and members of the public. Then we'll go over a quick overview about how those issues were prioritized before we show you the plan priority issues that got approved already by members of your policy committee. So again, just as a quick overview about how we got here so far, HEI as well, HEI did the initial process of creating a list of comprehensive plan issues by taking a look at a long list of resources that you thought were important to review. That includes existing plans, landscape stewardship planning documents, state agency planning documents, local water planning efforts, and reviewed all of those documents and created a comprehensive list of common issues we were identifying during review of those documents. By way, or just as a means of organizing the information that was coming in, we split them into these 4 different categories in order to kind of take a little bit of sense out of the process. Those 4 resource categories were groundwater, land use issues, issues that are impacting surface water resources, and issues that are impacting primarily habitat and recreational resources. So you might recognize these slides both from the public kickoff meeting as well as from your last advisory committee in November. So shown on the screen here are the issues that were identified dealing with groundwater resources within the Winona Crescent watershed. So examples include elevated levels of nitrates and its impact on human health, increased protection or the need for increased protection on wellhead and source water planning efforts, the need to monitor and track groundwater levels to ensure that there is adequate supply. Issues relating to habitat and recreation in the watershed are also shown on the screen and provided in packet materials as well. Some examples of some of those issues were making sure that there was public water access to designated trout streams, ensuring that there is long-term protection of forest, native prairie, pollinator habitats, and making sure that there's protection of rare habitats and plant communities as well. So just a few of the issues that got identified during that comprehensive inventory of issues. Land use issues are also shown on the screen here. They include failing septic systems, the need to manage and protect bluffland areas, and the need to improve soil health for carbon sequestration and agricultural productivity. Surface water, a ton of issues here for surface water. This one gets 2 screens, and you'll see from the packet material today, there's a whole lot of content that we'll be talking about related to surface water issues. But some of the issues that are probably not surprising to those on the call include, excess sediment loading, either from near channel or overland sources, low dissolved oxygen, the need to enhance and protect trout fisheries, urban stormwater runoff, and flooding and its impact to homes. So just a snapshot of some examples of issues impacting surface water resources. So as you can see, there's a ton of issues that got identified during that comprehensive process. And those issues, again, were created from review of data, but also feedback from the planning work group, the policy committee, the advisory committee, and members of the public during their public kickoff meeting. But there are so many issues there that in order to focus your 10-year planning effort, we needed to narrow down that list of issues to a list of reasonable issues that you can focus on in the 10-year plan. So in order to accomplish that, we created an issue prioritization worksheet, as well as some language for prioritizing one issue over another. Language that we used here is priority A, B, and C. And with that, I'll turn it over to Della to give a little bit more description about the issue prioritization worksheet.
Thank you, Rachel. So as Rachel already talked a little bit about, and all of you on the call, let me say most of you, because I'm not sure whom were all the folks who were available at the last meeting that we had in November. But most of you have had an opportunity to look at the issues prioritization. What we did was we looked at providing you with 6 different criteria. So looking at the urgency of need, the feasibility of addressing the issue, leveraging funding and things of that nature, and asking you to rank the various issues based on those criteria so that we could try to be as objective as possible and put them in the different buckets of A priority, B priority, C priority. A priority meaning that this is an issue that you're going to be addressing within the first within the span of your plan, and it's the most important. So you're probably going to be looking at it within the first couple of years, right? Then priority B is also important. It'll be the issue will be addressed as a part of your plan, but it's just it's a little bit less of a priority than A. And then C is one that as we think about it and as we've thought about it, it's some of those issues that may be addressed by a partner. It could be a secondary, have secondary benefits from some of the priority A or B issues that are addressed. And it is generally the lowest priority, lowest local priority item. So with that, as Rachel highlighted before, all issues cannot be priority A issues. We have to focus and leverage resources. So hence the need to segregate these things in those 3 different buckets. If you could, thank you. So with that, we took your ranking and coordinated them. So the first time, the first group to see this was the planning work group, PWG, planning work group. They saw it and they provided the first tier ranking. So they went through the process and identified A, B, and C priority items. Then our last meeting that we had with this group was in November, where the advisory group, at that time, you all were partnered with the policy committee. And you went through the process and you identified and laid out your ranking, and we clustered those as in that column, the second column that Rachel is highlighting. Then we went back to the planning work group and said, okay, you did the first cut. This is what the policy committee and the advisory committee are thinking in terms of this, and let's look at it and vet it based on, you know, your knowledge of the area, partners' contributions and things of that nature. So they went through and did their final recommendations, which were then presented to the policy committee, and they approved it on earlier this month, a few weeks ago, on the 10th. So now, with those issues, with the final issues identified, we are now going to be spending the next a little bit of time. I don't like to say hours, just like to say a little bit of time, talking through the priority A and priority B issues. So Rachel, if you could go to that next slide. So as you can see here, there's a good amount of, you can stay on the top one. Can you go all the way back up to the schedule? For those of you who are looking at your packet materials, recognize that, you know, groundwater, land use, and habitat, they have a lot of issues, but nothing compared to the bulk of the surface water, right? And as you can see, the way we have this on here now, we're going to be taking a break around, you know, after we're done with surface water. We may take a break sooner than that, just so you have a 5 minutes to stand up, stretch, whatever, and then we'll come back together. So with that, we'll go to, can you go to back to the presentation?
Yes.
Thank you.
Oop. And there we go.
Thank you. All right. All right. So now, as I mentioned, we're going to be spending a little bit more time go to the next one, please. Thank you. Is that your last slide?
Yeah, do you want me just to quick rip through the issues that got prioritized before moving to the geospatial work?
Yeah, actually, I was thinking we were going to go straight to the prioritization, but you know what? We're all flexible in this space. So we're going to do whatever makes the most sense. So right now, I just wanted to, you know, get you comfortable in the space that you are, as Rachel mentioned, you're about to go through and review a lot of data. The idea here is we want to make sure that the issues that were prioritized, we can focus in the implementation dollars and use mapping, geospatial information to kind of zero us into those, for lack of a better term, hotspot focus areas, things of that nature for you to spend more of your effort and energy on. So today we're going to be reviewing a ton of information, and because we're not all in person and because we may have bandwidth issues or different things like that, I'm going to be really leaning on you to unmute if you see something because that you think should, based on your background and information, that we should alter or reconsider, or you know, you want to validate. Please make sure to speak up. We were thinking we were going to have some ability to use some actions, but it looks like that is down, as well as the chat window. So we're really going to need to unmute and you know, talk through here. So with that, Rachel is going to walk through and give us a little bit of an example on some of the maps that you guys will be seeing. And then we will actually walk through all the priority A items and B items, and then look at the maps and talk about their ability to represent the issue, and then go from there.
All right, sounds fantastic. And thank you, Della. So as Della mentioned, I'm just going to spend a little bit of time kind of setting up how we're going to be spending our next chunk of time here focused on the priority issues that got established. The priority issues for ease of reviewing as well, in the event that anybody's kind of wanting a all in one eyeball, what are the priority issues? Please feel free to take a look at them clustered by group here as well in your packet materials. So we've got all the priority A issues listed here, and all the priority B listed here as well. So these are the two issue groups that we're going to be focusing our time on here. It is probably just a quick overview. Priority C issues are also identified in your packet material. They also include rationale about why they're not identified as a priority issue. A lot of it because they can be tackled by addressing some of the priority A and B items, and a lot of it because it's a little bit outside of local control and a local surface water management plan. So if there are any questions or concerns about priority A or B or C issues, please let us know. But again, we will be focusing our time and energy today on exactly as Della was just introducing, that geographic prioritization effort of these priority A and priority B issues. So the example that Della was alluding to is these hotspots. And I wanted to pull hopefully two maps that could be useful as far as kind of being recognizable to you from other documents that you may work with in your day-to-day business. One of them being a map that is in the Watershed Restoration and Protection Strategy document for the Winona Watershed. That's what's shown on the screen. The second map that I'm going to show an example is from a neighboring One Watershed, One Plan just to the north in the Zumbro. Some of you may have been involved with the Zumbro One Watershed, One Plan, and some of you may have been involved with the Winona RAPS planning process. So we're going to hopefully create a little bit of recognition between those two processes, just to kind of get to a better group understanding as far as the why about what we're doing today. So first, the example with the Winona Watershed Restoration Protection Strategy document. There's a series of maps that got included in that planning document that incorporated both local data as well as local expertise and community input in order to create these heat maps for where there are areas on the landscape where it's a high priority for restoration efforts related to that particular issue. So in this case, nutrient management. Anything that's in red is an issue that is impacted negatively by nutrient management and should be a high priority for restoration initiatives. So if you get a grant in the door dealing with nutrient management, you know where that should go right away. Similarly, restoration medium priority. These are areas where nutrient management is still an issue, but less of a focal issue when it comes to the importance of addressing it when resources and time become available. The last category that the planning work group really wanted to make sure got included in this effort is a protection category. In a lot of watersheds, the focus is restoration. The WinLaC is a really beautiful and unique watershed, and that restoration and protection are both equally important. So they wanted to make sure that protection was also included in here, so that where there are areas where the issue is maybe not as prominent, or the issue isn't having as many negative ramifications, it's protected so that it doesn't become an issue in the future. So those three buckets make sense so far? All righty. Similar effort, again, for those that may have been involved in the Zumbro watershed planning effort directly to the north. Again, these were grouped into different sub-watershed categories for protection, for restoration, and identifying what was a higher priority for protection and a lower priority, or for restoration, excuse me, and where are watersheds that should be a focus for restoration efforts. So we're really trying to mirror that same activity here in the Winona-La Crescent watershed so that you're geared with this information and implementation planning purposes. So how we get there is from mashing together a lot of geospatial information and getting your input. That is the whole secret sauce here. So in order to mash together that information, that's what has been done so far. The second most critical component of that is getting your input here today. So for each priority issue, I apologize, that should say priority issue or similar issues. So for each priority A and B issue, HEI, St. Mary's University of Minnesota, and the planning work group has identified the most relevant geospatial data and information that we could all come up with for representing each particular priority issue or group of similar issues. The mantra here that I want to make sure is really clear is to keep it simple. We wanted to try to encourage the planning work group to limit the amount of geospatial layers that are considered here to about 2 to 3 layers, which is a challenge. But oftentimes what we find is by including more and more information, this kind of starts to dilute the story about where restoration and protection efforts should really be focusing. So the goal is here to keep the data and information simple and focused on the most important and most representative pieces of information for telling that story of guiding protection and restoration efforts. So I'm just going to walk through a quick example about how we did this. We grouped together, as I mentioned, some priority issues got grouped together because they're really similar. An example of that is with groundwater, so elevated levels of nitrates as well as protection of wellhead source water protection areas. Something that the planning work group identified right away is these issues are pretty similar in that they've got similar geographic focus areas. So they wanted to look at them with the same protection and restoration focused map. The 3 geospatial data layers that the planning work group, HEI, and St. Mary's University of Minnesota came up with for representing this group of issues are where there are vulnerable drinking water supply management areas or DWSMAs, and where there are wellhead protection areas. Combine that with the Minnesota Department of Health pollution sensitivity layer, and then layer that on top of MDA's results in the initial township testing data set. So by combining all of that geospatial layers and information together and assigning a few rules here, the planning work group was able to come up with a draft map of elevated levels of where they should focus protection and restoration efforts on for elevated levels of nitrates and wellhead protection areas. So we looked at this map, we made a few adjustments, and the revised map is what's in your packet for review here today. So again, as a disclaimer, the planning work group has reviewed and has vetted the groundwater priority issues and maps. Everything else you're seeing at the exact same time as the planning work group. So we really intend this discussion here today about all of the issues to be extremely collaborative. And we're going to be asking you specific discussion points here in order to help us through this conversation here today. So we'll be walking through the mass amount of information that was in your packet. We'll be reviewing each priority issue or group of issues. I'll be doing a quick overview of the geospatial data and information that was prioritized by HEI St. Mary's and the planning work group, and a quick overview of the technical methodology that was applied in order to create that heat map, primarily just because some people love that methodology know-how. But also we just want to make sure that we're not doing anything black boxy as far as how we're creating these colored heat maps. But then Della is going to be taking the baton on each of these maps as well and asking you 2 key discussion points. One of them is, does this priority map that has been generated as a draft, does it capture the issue based on your background knowledge and understanding and expertise of that issue in the Winona-La Crescent watershed? And if not, are there certain adjustments that need to be made to that map based off of your expertise and knowledge of the watershed and the issue, with a rationale for what adjustment you would like to see and why you think that adjustment should be made. At the end of each issue that we walk through and the map that we walk through, will also, or Della will also be calling for input on some of the key action items that should be tackled for addressing each issue or group of issues as well. So we'll be asking for your feedback. Della will be asking and prompting for your feedback on two primary things with each of these issues we will be discussing. Della, am I missing anything here?
I think the only thing that I want to stress and we wanted to stress is to make sure to, with the keep it simple in mind, thinking about the priority issues. There's so many things that could be included, but there are reasons why they were not. So if there are opportunities to enhance the information, definitely share it. However, we'll be looking for the rationale for it so this group can wrestle with it in order for us to make a decision to move forward. But for every one of these, you all are going to get tired of me asking the same questions, but it's really going to be focused in on, does it capture the issue? Based on your background and your understanding, does it capture the issue? And that's really what you want to be answering for each of these. And then if it doesn't, what information can you share to help make an adjustment and to ensure that there's rationale behind it, so that it's not just, hey, let's move this, but it's let's move this because we know this information and it could enhance what you're doing, right? So again, I'm going to be a broken record, forgive me, but it will be those two questions. And then after that, you know, we have an outstanding group of folks on this phone, and we want to make sure on this platform, I should say, we want to make sure that if there's any information we can gather from you in terms of, right now, I believe that there's an action. There are a couple actions that I've heard of that could address this issue. Go ahead and let us know that. The one thing I know Rachel and I have talked about and we want to stress is that you will have other opportunities to identify implementation actions for the different issues that are generated. So don't feel like today you have to have the answers. It's not today, just whatever you have that comes to mind. And if nothing comes to mind, that's okay as well. But we will be coming back to you to address that for as we move these forward. So with that, groundwater it is.
All righty. So diving right in, and then I'll pass it over to Della here. Again, just as a quick orientation disclaimer, everything that we'll be going through, as Della mentioned, is organized by resource. We'll start with groundwater. That's the one map that the planning work group has seen. But again, and as the disclaimer says here, we are still making a few revisions here. We're going to create an additional map by recommendation of the policy committee to kind of show how the shallow and deep water aquifer systems differ in the watershed and therefore may impact management as well. So just a note there. And just one other thing to protect the reputation of our partners as well. These maps shown in here have not been beautified yet. They're not plan ready. These are internal maps that were created by HEI. They're going to be passed over by our partner, St. Mary's of University of Minnesota, in order to be beautified and made plan ready and shown in a way that the public will actually want to look at instead of these quick outputs. All righty. So with that, a quick overview of the first priority issues we'll be talking at for groundwater, and I'll give a quick intro to the data, the methodology, and pass it over to Sheila for asking the questions about the map and the actions. So the first two issues, you'll probably recall from the presentation about 5 minutes ago, we combined nitrates and wellhead protection source water areas in the same cluster because they're pretty related as far as where action items should be focused on. And as you recall, DWSMAs and wellhead protection areas were identified as important, the MDH pollution sensitivity and the MDA initial township testing data set. I'll give a quick overview of this prioritization methodology, so people kind of get a high level understanding about the black box behind, or the not black box, the avoiding the black box methodology for how these heat maps got created. Essentially what we did is we took that pollution sensitivity layer and grouped them into 4 different categories of low, medium, high, and very high, in order to create 3 natural breaks of what the data was telling us. And we use that to create the 3 initial buckets that were identified from the WinLaC, or from the Winona RAPS process, that restoration high, restoration medium, and protection. Then we took where there were vulnerable or highly vulnerable duismas, and if a highly vulnerable duisma overlaid something, we moved it up a priority level just to make sure that it got categorized as a restoration high, so that any place with a vulnerable duisma was identified as a high priority area. Similarly, from the township testing results, if a high was categorized for a sub-watershed, that was also automatically categorized as a restoration high because the nitrate levels were elevated in that particular area. So the way that this shows up in the map that the planning work group has reviewed and made some revisions is shown on the screen here. Again, you can see the duismas that are outlined on the map here, as especially those that are very high vulnerability. And the purple outline is wellhead protection areas. Then you've got the sub-watersheds. So these light black squiggly lines between the larger, deeper, thicker planning region lines. Those are the HUC 12 sub-watersheds that are the focus of these heat maps. So if it is pink, it is classified as a restoration high priority. So efforts related to nitrate, to fix nitrate problems, are going to be focused in those pink sub-watersheds first. Efforts where their nitrate is still a concern, but maybe not as much of a concern, are in yellow. There's that restoration medium priority. And areas where nitrates are comparatively less of a concern, but some vigilance needs to be demonstrated here to make sure that that doesn't become a concern, are shown in the green. So with that, I will pass it over to Della for conversation about this map.
So as I mentioned, there's no surprise here. The questions are, as you think about this, does this map capture the issue based on your background and your understanding of this area? Again, one of the things that I want to highlight is that we don't unfortunately have the chat function, and we don't have the reactions function. We do have the hands raised function. And for the folks that are in the room with Sheila, I think everybody has a mic so they can talk directly to us, correct?
Yes, that's true.
Okay. And then for anybody on the, on this virtual call, I'll be looking for folks who unmute because I can't see anybody except Mark. And then we can go from there. All right. So again, Rachel has highlighted the fact that based on the various geospatial information that they have, the maps that they put together, and their methodology, they have developed this map, which has your high priority restoration areas in pink. As you can see, there's a good number of that. Then there's the medium priority in yellow, and then the protection area in green. Based on your background, does this map capture the issue? All right, it looks like Dawn just unmuted, and then we'll go to Meg.
Did Altura's updated duisma boundary get put into this map? Because their duisma just got like probably 5 times larger than what it was.
Wow. We did reach out to our partners with MDH to confirm that we had the latest, greatest duisma boundaries. So yes, to the best available data and information we were able to receive.
Okay. Thanks, Dawn. And then Meg.
Yeah, I was just gonna double check on the dating of the map as well. I'm really new to this area, so I'm just I'm learning as we go. So you've answered my question. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, any others with questions about this map and what it represents. Okay. Seeing
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, I was just going to say, when we brought this map to the policy committee, I just wanted to make that clear that there was discussion about this should be divided into two maps, two priority maps, one for the shallower aquifers and one for the deeper ones, because there might be some different implementation actions based on whether it's a deep line aquifer or a shallow one that would be having contamination issues. And so that was discussed, and that it's not shown here and it doesn't need to be, but that was still a discussion.
This is John. And I guess one thing that I'm noticing is that a lot of the wellhead protection areas aren't showing up as a very high priority, but it is something we call out, I think, as one of the specific kind of issues. So I guess just curious about that, and if that's accurate, or looks like a lot of them are green or yellow.
I see what you're
Go
saying.
ahead, Rachel.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Della. Yes, the purple outline is the wellhead protection areas, and you're right that some of them they frequently overlap with, and I'm sure there are partners on the call that can speak to this way better than I, overlap with the boundaries of the drinking water supply management areas as well. And those duismas are categorized as very high, moderate, low, or well, that's all of the categories. So the wellhead protection areas are just encompassing the duisma category that's underlaid it. So we didn't actually give that a different priority. We just wanted to show, especially where there are high vulnerable duismas, that those are absolutely in the high restoration focus areas.
John, does that address your question?
Yeah, so I guess what's shown in that purple zone is the duisma vulnerability. It's not necessarily the 12 prioritization. That's sort of a separate thing.
Yep. Bingo.
Okay.
Thanks, John and Rachel. Any other questions?
So this is getting back to, is this capturing the issue fully? And
yeah.
One thing I know I've seen on other plans is actually looking at inputs and loading within the watershed. I'm wondering is that not available here because with the smaller watersheds, we haven't done the same level of modeling, or do we just not have the same input data?
Rachel?
Yeah, I can jump in there again as well. Thanks, David. Yes, we will be also including modeling information. Part of what this planning process is doing is completing a hydroconditioning or completing the hydroconditioning DEM for the Winona-La Crescent watershed area, because there wasn't a complete DEM or a comprehensive set of model or tool that could inform the planning process. So that hydro modification process is just wrapping up now. And then the prioritized target and measure application is going to be run in order to help with loading information. Exactly as you say, that loading information will be used in order to influence the heat map for especially surface water constituents of concern related to nutrients and sediment loading. But for purposes of the groundwater nitrates, since PTMAP is not a groundwater modeling tool, we wanted to rely on the geospatial information most prominent for groundwater resources. So hopefully that's helpful, David.
David, does that address your question?
Yeah, it does. Thanks.
Okay.
I think, I guess one comment is just in the areas where a lot of that sensitivity is driven by karst. For specifically the shallow aquifers, you can kind of use them comparably. It's definitely not perfect, but it can work as a proxy.
Yeah, and that's a good note, David. What we can do is in a later map that we'll be going over for surface water. Once we have the prioritized target measure application data, which will tell us where are the hot spots on the landscape for surface water runoff of total nitrogen from the landscape, we can kind of layer that over this map just to make sure that it's telling at least a reasonable story. Because exactly as you were saying, you know, that surface water, groundwater connectivity is so unique in this watershed. So I think that's a good suggestion if the group is comfortable with that comparison.
I'm not seeing any objections. Looks like I don't see any no's in the council chamber for the folks that I can see. All right. With that then, Rachel, what I'd like you to do is, if there are no other comments on this one, I don't see anybody unmuting or having any other questions. The one thing I want us to go back to is just to think about, you know, some potential actions to address the nitrate issue, especially as you're looking at those high, just to address the nitrate issue. So are there some things that folks have been thinking about, have heard, that they think would be good for us to capture in the action box? Recognize that this will come back to you again, so you will have another opportunity to look at this. I am not seeing any hands or anybody unmuting at the moment. All right, Dawn.
Are you
Thank you.
looking for like action items as far as implementation ideas or?
Yes. So we're looking for implementation ideas, actions to address the issue. Yes. Thank you for
Well,
asking for that clarification.
I mean, the Department of Ag is going to be working in the Altura and Elgin drinking water supply management areas. They're level 2s when it comes to the groundwater protection rule. So we'll be working directly with the producers in those areas. And I think those are the only level 2 DWISMAs in this outline. It's hard to tell when nothing's labeled on the map. So we'll be working with nitrogen best management practices in those areas.
So, okay. For clarification, you're going to be working with the producers to help them implement best practices, or is it an education and outreach? Can you clarify what that means?
Both.
Both, okay. So
And Don, should Utica be added to?
Is Utica in there?
I think so.
Rachel, looked like there was a question about,
I
think Sheila had a question about that.
Utica might
Utica
only
being
be,
added.
I mean, Utica be added, but it's only a really small portion because I think that's St. Charles is the bigger one there. Because that's on the county line. Yeah, only a very small portion of Utica is in this WinLaC boundary.
Okay, you're right.
But it could be added because part of it is in there, so.
Okay.
We've had dollars to address it in the River One Water One plan as well.
So their dollars, their implementation dollars to address nitrogen, nitrate issues and the Red River One Watershed One plan. Thank you for that.
It's specifically to target work within the DWISMAs, and Utica was part of
Got
Our
it.
river plan.
Perfect. Thank you for clarifying.
Yep.
So that was to address the Utica question, and that dollars are out there to address that. All right, anything else for this one?
This is Emily's
Emily?
note.
Mhm.
Yeah, some ideas that I have, and it could kind of tie into some of the work that Department of Ag is doing. But you know, some funding for more manure management plans and or nutrient management plans for commercial fertilizer.
Okay.
And then also potentially building off some work that has been done in the Whitewater through a 319 grant that Winona County has, or I should say the Whitewater Joint Powers Board has with MPCA. And that's doing cover crop implementation as well as testing corn basal stock tissue for nitrogen and soil for nitrogen.
Okay. And then it looks like Dawn
Sheila,
had-
I assume that 319 grant is part of what Jeff Betch is working on.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
And that'll be ending September of 2022.
Okay.
Okay. Any others? All right, thank you for that. One down and a few more to go.
Alrighty, and just to clarify, can folks see what I'm when I'm typing in these comment boxes? Okay, okay. I just want to make sure that that text is clear enough and pivot if need be. All right, we got a quick hitter one here, which is always nice. Start with a bang and then do a quick hitter right away. The priority issue here, which is a B priority issues, is unsealed or poorly constructed wells. And the reason this is a quick hitter one is the planning work group really didn't want to do much prioritization throughout the watershed because they wanted this considered on a case-by-case basis, watershed wide. So our map is very exciting. With that, I'll turn it over to Sheila.
All right, so I guess in looking at this and thinking about what Rachel just said about dealing with things on a case-by-case basis, which then in essence makes everything a priority, a high priority. You know, are you all, I guess I don't know if I want to ask the question if you're all in agreement of this, but it's really more in terms of, given the issue, are you okay with this approach? And does it capture the issue of unsealed wells and the importance of it? Adam?
Just something I thought from the previous mapping, you talked about you were going to be splitting that off between deep and shallow aquifers. Would it make sense to consider the deep aquifer here for unsealed wells as a way of prioritizing this? And then I know some of the discussion with the partners was they wanted to really emphasize that if it's an unsealed well, really want to tackle that, but maybe that's a way you could do that in kind of a scoring as you're going through your funding by giving well sealings a higher score. Just something to think about.
All right. Anything else? Rachel, did you need clarification on that, or you think you're good with what Adam said? Perfect. Any others? Any questions in the council chamber? I can't see you guys very well, but.
I've got a question here, I guess. When we talk about the wells, I've had mine tested here with the program here for a couple of years. We are in the higher nitrate zones, but also we had something come up in the well this year, Cyanozine, which is a product that hasn't been used for close to 10 to 15 years, and it's still showing up. I guess this is the question for the whole group going forward is let's look at the evaluation of this stuff as well. we start talking about nitrate, I mean, we've been dealing with this for years and years and years. And we've been throwing things at it, and still haven't seen, you know, I don't have all the information in front of me as far as, you know, years past, if we've moved that number at all. But how are we going to evaluate this stuff going forward? And why are we seeing those products show up now and not 20 years before this?
Glenn, this is Dawn. I think that your question maybe revolves around lag time discussion. And what is the lag time in these aquifers or wells? And so lag time might be a priority to think about in this whole thing. So.
Okay. So Dawn, if I'm understanding this correctly, Glenn had, I think it's Glenn, I don't know if that's, it felt like Dawn, you knew who spoke, but we're now, what's happening is folks have been looking at nitrates, and now you're starting to see other constituents of concern and thinking about what that transport time is, or that lag time is between when you start seeing other constituents and the new things that you're seeing now. So wanting to make sure that you're thinking about lag time and other constituents that could show up as you're testing.
Well, it's going to be pretty important for nitrates and moving the needle on nitrates with practices that we're putting in place in the ground now.
Okay.
You know, how long is it going to take before the practices we are doing now will actually make a change in the nitrates in the groundwater that we'll be drinking? So the question of lag time always comes up, or residence time, or however you want to label it. You know, before we're going to start seeing a change in the water we're drinking. So,
right.
And it could be decades.
Okay. And that's definitely important information to share with the group, because you don't want to feel like you did something today and you should see something new tomorrow, and it takes a longer time for you to see change. Caitlin.
Yeah, thanks, Della. This is Caitlin Brady with Homestead Soil and Water. I just wanted to just add to Don's comment. I think she's right on with the issue of lag time, but also the issue that, you know, over time we've been testing for nitrate, one, because it is a health concern, but secondly, because it's a really good indicator parameter and it's cheap for us to monitor. But the concern with seeing nitrate in the water is always that we're going to start seeing other contaminants. And one of those that they've most recently found that was just brought up was cyanozine. And that was a bit of a surprise, I believe, for the Minnesota Department of Health to start seeing cyanozine. The issue first started up in Dakota County, and then they most recently just started testing for it more broadly around southeastern Minnesota. So I think not only for us to focus on nitrate, but to focus on other emerging contaminants of concern, because there are other contaminants that are a health concern for us as well.
Okay. Thank you for that, Caitlin. And then Emily, and then it looks like we have Amanda.
So related to this, I'm wondering if we could maybe add another action to the issue that we just got done talking about above, and that's maybe adding like a project development action item of some sort to maybe help direct future monitoring, not only for nitrate, but then other parameters of concern that we're finding in groundwater.
Okay. All right. Amanda?
So I was thinking, kind of putting together what Adam was saying and what Glenn was saying. When we're looking at decommissioning a well, sealing a well, seeing if there's any way to take a sample from that. So we have a baseline of what that well was at, what we sealed off, and things like that. Just because some of these wells that we're sealing may not have been sampled in, you know, a decade or more.
Okay. All right. Anything else? So it looks like Amanda got us into that next phase of looking at implementation activities for this issue of unsealed or poorly constructed wells. So the first thing is to consider testing if you're going to seal those wells. Anything else? Any other implementation actions to address that issue?
This is Sheila. Quick question. I know that for working with the DWISMAs, that there are efforts to try and determine what that lag time is. And maybe this could be more directed to Don. Do you think it makes sense to try and figure out lag times for the other DWISMAs, even if they're not at level 2?
Well, yeah, I mean, it would all help down the road probably for education and outreach and implementing things, but there's some tracer work out there for age dating wells that I know MDA is looking into, but maybe it can be part of this too. I don't know. I just was thinking about that.
Okay, so for just wanted to make sure I'm clear. So go ahead.
Sorry, the priority DWISMAs are going to be the level 2 DWISMAs because they've tested their public drinking water supply wells have tested over 8 milligrams per liter of nitrate, and then the level 1 DWISMAs would be below that, and those would be just like maybe education and outreach potentially, but the level 2 is where MDA is right now going to focus priorities. So as far as thinking about implementation, it might make more sense to have the level 2 DWISMA as a higher priority in this plan.
All right.
I think going along with
that address your, oh, go ahead, Terry.
Going along with the checking the lag times, I think there's some research starting where they're looking at how the different soils types maybe you might have different lag times. So I think that's of concern as far as looking at what's going on in those wells and the higher test. But I think also just realizing that, you know, there are a lot of areas where the nitrates are rising, whether it's lag time or whatever the case may be. And we're noticing that in, you know, some of our safe drinking water program we're doing with Homestead, that, you know, a lot of people are looking for, you know, solutions. So maybe some implementation needs to be focused on those solutions, whether it be treatment systems or new well construction.
Thank you, Terry. Just wanted to check in with Sheila just to make sure that your question was addressed and we've captured it.
Yes, you did.
Okay, thank you. All right, with that, does anybody else have anything else to add for this one before we move to the next item? Okay. All right, Rachel.
All right, next one we've been talking about a little bit as it certainly relates to all things groundwater, and that's the Karst Geology. So issue statement here being surface and groundwater interconnectivity due to Karst Geology. We had some great discussions with the planning work group about just how to prioritize these issues because it does have ripples to all surface and groundwater issues. But the layers that the planning work group wanted to work within for characterizing this issue is the concentration of karst and springs per sub watershed, using and highlighting that karst features database and taking a look at the location of the Decorah and the St. Lawrence edges. So really what we did here is we sorted into categories of high, medium, and low instead of restoration and protection priorities. So it's a little unique compared to the other maps based off of planning work group feedback. We use the percentiles of 4 different metrics. That's the springs per area, the karst features per area, the karst prone formations, and the area of those Decorah and St. Lawrence ledges in order to create those 3 different categories of high, medium, and low karst features, which is what's shown on the map. So we did, based off a recommendation of the planning work group for purposes of the discussion here today and this very interim product map, we did throw in the karst features database so people can kind of visually see that yes, higher concentrations of black, blue dots do equal generally a higher rank of the karst density. So the high density in yellow or in red, the medium in yellow, and the low in green. So with that, I will pass it over to you, Della.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for that, Rachel. I guess as you all look at this this map, do you have any questions first off with what Rachel presented about the methodology? And then does this capture the issue with looking at the karst features, springs data, and then prioritizing those in terms of density? You can see that primary cluster of the pink or red areas, as well as the yellow and the, hopefully you all can see the yellow and the green low priority areas.
Maybe just a comment. I'm certainly not an expert on this by any means, but it does seem a little bit like there's a pretty high concentration of springs, and then the karst features kind of in the very southeastern part of the area that we're looking at. I guess that would be just north of the Houston County border, but just just kind of in there. So did that not just come out high enough to be quite in the high density category, or just curious?
Great eyes, Mark. This was actually one that the planning work group decided to intentionally move down. It was actually previously lit up as a red for the higher density, but based off of field work in the area, just thought that, you know, the focus of karst density as they work within it from a natural resource management perspective is better characterized by this area around the Whitewater and the Garvins of Watershed. So, but very astute observation. Otherwise that would be red.
Any other questions? Any other thoughts about this? I wonder, Rachel, if there's a note to add to the map as well, because I'm sure that question is going to continue to come up, because folks are going to see that area, see that cluster, and then wonder why it's not blaze red. So there could be an inclusion of a map, a note. Thank you. All right, in addition to Mark's astute observation, any other questions or thoughts about whether or not this is capturing the issue, which is really looking at that interconnectivity due to the karst geology?
Hey, I have one question quick here.
Mm-hmm.
Is it perhaps that do springs score higher in this metric than regular karst features? It looks like in the red area, because I farm down in that southeast area there where all what we just talked about there, and there's not that many sinkholes if that's what we're talking about by karst features, but it seems like in that red area in the western region there's a lot more what are identified as springs, Whereas you're looking at other area where it's a lot of black dots, as karst features, there's very few springs right in the middle of that black dot area. I mean, is it a 1-for-1 or is springs count as have a higher weighting and when you're looking at this than just regular karst features?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, I can answer from a ranking perspective for purposes of the map, but I also see Amanda's hand is up and she might be able to better answer. For purposes of the prioritization ranking, they are 1-to-1. So if there's a spring, if there's a sinkhole, if there's Decorah edge, those all got equal consideration as a karst feature. But I will turn it over to Amanda in case she would like to add to that response.
Yeah, so in this southeast area down here, we had decided to change that yellow because a lot of our kind of ground cover, how we're working the land is different in the southeast area. Over here, there's a lot more bluff area, a lot more woodlands, a lot, less going on farming wise. And so the higher priority was given to flatter, more open areas where there's a lot more ag involved versus in the southeast where there's more of the rolling hills and broken up with the bluffs and trees.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, I have one more question. I'm not as familiar with this Decorah and St. Louis edge terminology here as maybe I should be. It's a new one for me, so I'm willing to admit I don't know and ask the question. What could someone give me an example of what constitutes those edges that you're referring to? What kind of geological or land feature I should be looking for?
I can give a
Go
quick
ahead,
intro
Rachel.
and then I might turn it over to, I know Skip was speaking on that for the planning work group in the past. So Skip, if you're able to expand or anybody else in the group. It's a feature that has a little bit more of an impenetrable layer associated with it. A geologic feature that is pretty prominent in this watershed area. But with that, I'm going to pass it on over to somebody that can explain it way better than I. So Skip, are you available?
Oh yeah, I can try and give it a
Put you on the hot spot.
down a little. So the Decorah is it's a shale feature. I'm not as familiar with the St. Lawrence, but I think they're both, they're an aquitard where, like Rachel was saying, the water maybe passes through the upper bedrock geologic layers and then it hits this shale bed that's somewhat or mostly impenetrable by water, so it pushes it horizontally, laterally out to the edge areas where oftentimes it's expressed as, I don't know, you can have these kind of mid-slope wetlands, or I think you see springs and seeps and other discharges in those areas. So it's all kind of tied to karst in that, sinkholes in the fractured geologic bedrock all has that connectivity where surface water infiltrates into the cracks and crevices and works its way through the geologic features. And once it hits the Decorah St. Lawrence, then it pushes to the edge, if you will, and that edge is oftentimes areas that you see, like I said, wetland springs, seeps, stuff like that, and then it will drop over at that point into the lower bedrock, which oftentimes is where we're grabbing drinking water and things like that.
Thanks, Skip. Looks like Amanda has has her hand up.
Yeah, I was just gonna kind of expand on that for Glenn. In your area, Glenn, it's a lot of that red clay that makes the water stay on top of the surface or just go in a short ways, then moves horizontally, like Skip was saying, across the horizon. And it's an area that the water can multiple times go from surface to ground to surface water again, and has higher capability of becoming polluted or picking up contaminants on its way to wherever it's going.
Well, thanks for answering that question. I'm glad I asked because it kind of clears up some mysteries. I've always wondered, we farm a bunch of land in the Nodine area, and there's, especially in that area, there's these mysterious wet spots, sometimes on the side of a hill, and it's wet and for no explainable reason, but that would explain that. That would makes perfect sense to me now. So thank you.
All right. Thanks, Rachel, Skip, and Amanda for answering those questions. With that, anything else to add to this? Okay. So with that, Rachel, wanted to just do a quick time check. It's about 2:30. You guys, did you all want to take a couple-minute break now or wait a little bit longer before, you know, go into surface water and then take a quick break? And it's only going to be a couple minutes because we're only through groundwater and we have a ton more to go through, which for the surface water and some of the other items, the planning work group members, this would be the first time they're seeing this. So if you're good to keep chugging along, we can. All right. Surface water.
All right, so the first map here, and a few of these maps, I'm just going to give the disclaimer here exactly as was it Dave was saying earlier. Yes, that there are some geospatial data layers that are very important for informing this plan. Predominantly this PTM map or Prioritized Target and Measure application results. We're going to be bringing those in once that data is created. So we do have some maps here that are incomplete. The draft is incomplete and it is pending additional data. That being said, we still think it's helpful to at least introduce some of the concepts that we're generating as an engineering team and a planning work group team about how these issues can be geographically characterized to make sure that we're heading in the right direction. So what we've got here for the first priority issues that are grouped together, dealing with surface water, these are both priority A issues as recommended by the planning work group and as affirmed by the policy committee. First one is excess nutrients. So that is nitrogen as well as phosphorus and is loading to watershed streams, impact on aquatic life, and the need for field management practices to reduce excessive nutrient loading and nutrient cycling. So the data and information, and we did break the three geospatial layers rule here. The data and information that the planning work group has approved for characterizing this issue on the landscape include that prioritized target and measure application data, which again is pending. And that's that data for nitrogen as well as phosphorus loading, where on the landscape are the greatest amounts of nitrogen and phosphorus leaving the edge of a field. But we also wanted to make sure we were gut checking that with some existing modeling data that already exists in part of the watershed. We do have SWOT loading results that show heat maps for nitrogen and phosphorus in a component of the watershed. And while we weren't able to use that for the entire watershed, we still kind of want to gut check and take that into consideration when we're creating these heat maps. Lastly, we want to make sure we're looking at specific resource reaches so that you can have some specific resources prioritized here as well. Primarily nutrient impaired streams. So wanting to make sure that you've got those and the TMDLs associated and identified as priority as part of your plan. But also those streams that are on the tipping point of protection and restoration. The reason we light up these streams that are nearly or barely impaired, as we call them, is it aligns with Clean Water Fund, State Clean Water Fund priority as established by the Board of Water and Soil Resources. So by identifying these nearly or barely impaired streams in your plan, you've got the list of surface water resources that are the highest priority for state funds to be tackled. As identified in your plan. So we wanted to make sure that information is provided. Methodology isn't super interesting here because we're still waiting on PTM map information. So in the meantime, what we've got here shown on the map are the nutrient and nitrate impaired streams shown by the green. And this is according to the MPCA 2020 impaired waters list. And we also have, based off of analysis of existing water quality data in EQUIS, we have the stream systems that are lit up as nearly or barely impaired for total phosphorus. So we've got one stream reach lit up as nearly or barely impaired for that. That could be a focus of protection and restoration efforts. So I guess the question that I'll turn it over for Della is just to make sure that we're heading in the right direction on this nutrient map. So with that, on over to Della.
All right, so with that, if you could take us back to the list, I think that's going to be really helpful for folks to see since the map doesn't, is not complete. So for this list here, thinking about those things that are pending and the things that are planned, what else, would this capture the issue, recognizing that you will have an opportunity to review that. With that, Emily?
Yeah, thank you. So I made a little note that I'm wondering if we should also add the streams that have an impaired macroinvertebrate or fish communities that have nitrate and or eutrophication as a stressor, because we might not have an impaired waters listing for nitrate or phosphorus, but the biology, the fish and the bugs might be affected by those things.
Okay.
And we could find all that information in the stressor ID report that's on the PCA website.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Emily. And I know it is something that was considered, something I failed to mention, I apologize. This Winona RAPS heat map process that was created, I know did include and consider the stressors in addition to the impaired waters. So we can certainly do the same thing. I know it is captured in our eyeball review of these figures that were created as part of the RAPS, but I think if we can include the latest and greatest data and information instead, that'll just make these even better. So great suggestion.
Thanks for that, Emily. Anybody else? Can you take us back to that list? I think that is really helpful for folks to eyeball and kind of know what the, visualize what might be on here. And it's great to see that the information that David was asking about in terms of loading input and loading information will be captured with the PTM app information as well as the SWOT data. So we do have that question answered. Any others? Any other thoughts in addition to what Emily mentioned?
Yeah, quick question again here, Winona. Can you explain to me again what the process is of identifying a nutrient impaired stream? I mean, is it a series of tests or a series of tests over time or one test? I mean, what goes into identifying that?
Emily, how do you feel about taking that baton?
Sure, I'll try my best. So the MPCA is the agency that kind of leads determining whether or not a water is impaired or not impaired. And so what we do is we go out and we sample for 2 years in a row, and we have to have a minimum amount of information in order to say, this stream is impaired for nitrate or this stream is impaired for sediment. And depending on what we're looking at, whether we're looking at sediment or whether we're looking at nutrients, they all kind of have different required amount of data points. So you can't just like go out once, sample a stream once and say, oh, nope, it's impaired. We have to have like multiple lines of evidence, but they're all different, just, depending on what we're looking at. And if you really want to get into it, just like go into the Google and enter in MPCA water quality data assessment, and you can read the 100-page document about all that good stuff. But that's the gist of it.
Does that answer your question, Glenn?
Yeah, thank you.
All right. And thank you for that, Emily. All right. So with this, recognizing that the maps are not completed yet, you will have an opportunity to look at it again. But the ideas that were brought up was to make sure to incorporate that stressor ID information that's captured as part of the RAPS information that Rachel's going to make sure is there. As we think high level about, excess nutrients and, field management practices, what actions, implementation actions would you guys, not you guys, I hate saying that, and it always comes to mind when I'm facilitating a session. My apologies. Would you think to implement in response to those issues? As you think about it now, what are some things that come to mind that are implementable actions for addressing those two issues of excess nutrients and field management practices, increasing field management practices to reduce those? I don't see anybody unmuting. Anybody want to take Emily?
I'm sorry.
No, don't be sorry. We want to hear from you.
Okay. So I was thinking, one thing that comes to mind is I think this could maybe be tied into some of the work that we've already talked about under the groundwater nitrate priority, doing some, cover cropping, soil testing, that sort of thing. And then also working in maybe focusing some work for pasture management. And then stream bank work, partnering with DNR and Trout Unlimited, figuring out which stream banks are maybe, having a lot of erosion and contributing phosphorus tied sediment to the stream systems.
Okay. All right, thank you for that, Emily. All right, any others? All right. Rachel, we can move to the next one, and I think this one's incomplete as well.
Awesome, correct. So this one will be pretty similar as far as the data and information that's missing. So again, we are waiting on PTM map results because one of the features that gets prioritized both in issue statement as well as certainly as an urban stormwater runoff issue is Lake Winona. The two priority issues that are addressed here are stormwater runoff, which can contribute poor water quality, clarity, alter natural flow and harm aquatic life, and nutrient runoff and legacy loading in Lake Winona and its impact on water quality, clarity, aquatic life and habitat. So these two issues were clustered together by recommendation of the planning work group for purposes of geographically mapping and addressing these issues. The layers that are approved for characterizing this issue on the landscape is one, MS4 boundaries, because they identify areas that are characterized as urban. The RAPS figure 28, one of those heat maps that was created as part of the RAPS process for identifying priority areas for stormwater management. And lastly, PTM map results, which will be used to identify areas that contribute excess nutrients downstream into an urban receiving water body. So again, the map here is incomplete. What we have right now is MS4 boundaries. We did not bring in the RAPS results yet because we don't want to artificially inflate those high priority, low priority, medium priorities without that PTM map loading yet. So here you'll just kind of see the MS4s that will be the focus of this issue of concern. Of course, Winona, Crescent as well. So you'll likely be seeing some high priority areas in the sub watersheds that interact and overlap with the city of Winona and Crescent.
Okay, thank you for that, Rachel. And then I think with this one, because this one is really only highlighting the MS4 boundaries. So did you want to move up just so we have a sense for the two other items that will be included and whether additional items should be included to capture, the urban runoff issue, and then the nutrient and legacy loading to Lake Winona. Looking at these three maps or geospatial layers as plans, using your imagination, because these are incomplete, but recognizing that you all will have another opportunity to look at it and influence what's there. Any other items you think should be included or anything should be replaced as you look at these issues and how it might be represented on a map? All right, Emily, I'm not sure if you still have your hand up from the last time or not, but I'll go to Amanda and then come back to you if you still have a question. All right, Amanda?
Yeah, I was wondering, on the map down there, it only shows Winona and the Crescent highlighted, but the south branch of the Whitewater River does go through St. Charles. Will either of those other layers that could potentially be brought in highlight that? Because obviously there could be urban stormwater runoff in that area.
Go ahead, Rachel.
Yeah, what I'd say, Amanda, it may, depending on if it was considered in the RAPS during their civic engagement process as well. And I can certainly circle back with you related to St. Charles to see, you know, based off of my review of that RAPS process, does St. Charles light up?
This is John. One item I wanted to discuss was to see if there might be a data set somewhere on impervious surfaces that there's been some aerial study on that. I know just like the MS4 boundary, like parts of Winona are pretty much just forest and they show up there. And so if there's a way to maybe pinpoint this more to where there is that, concrete, I'm not sure if that exists or not, but just a thought.
Okay. So you're thinking about complementing the MS4 information with impervious surface mapping. So that would be something to consider adding to the geospatial layers if it's available. Rachel.
Gotcha. And just to answer your question as well, Amanda, it does not look like the subwatershed surrounding St. Charles necessarily got moved up, but the geographic area surrounding the city, it does look like it's more of a medium priority. So if it's of the interest of the group, what we can do is a similar process where maybe we can bring in municipal boundaries instead of just MS4s in order to include some of these smaller communities. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so, because I mean, it goes through Elba too, although there's less possibility of runoff in Elba, but yeah, I think that would help.
Okay.
So municipal boundaries instead. And then I heard check for impervious.
The impervious surfaces. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, I will certainly check for that, John. I believe it will probably tell us, if I were to guess, a similar story to where the municipal boundaries are. But we'll check for that data regardless, just to make sure if the story changes at all, that we're understanding it. If that sounds good and fair to you as well.
That sounds good. Yep, that's fine.
Right.
Awesome.
Thanks,
John.
All right. So any others? Right. Seeing no questions or anybody unmuting. I think Rachel, for this one, we can go back up and this is always an interesting one when you start thinking about implementation actions to address surface runoff or stormwater runoff in an urban system. So any thoughts on potential implementation actions to address mitigating some of these issues around runoff and poor quality runoff and in urban areas? Amanda.
I think this is a great area to kind of push rain barrels and rain gardens, native pollinator, to get some deep rooted plants out there in the landscape in these very impervious areas.
Okay. So rain barrels, rain gardens, and native pollinators. All right. All right, we've got, hopefully I don't say it wrong. Is this Sadie?
Hi, yes, it's Sadie.
All right.
A couple of the things that I've specifically been working on in my work with Green Corps and City of Rochester is on stormwater and surface water pollutants. And a lot of my work has been looking at how education alone doesn't really pay off. And instead there needs to be a focus on behavior change methodology. And so if it's possible to add, just because the MS4 permit only calls for outreach and education, it doesn't call for behavior change, specifically pointing out behavior change as a tool for changing pollutants would be great. The other one is that PCA itself, I don't think has plans yet to be testing for chlorides in any of their upcoming monitoring. It has to be specifically requested. And even if it is requested, it's not necessarily guaranteed that it will be monitored. So trying to find an alternative way of finding the baseline and monitoring for chlorides should also be listed somewhere in priorities.
Okay, thank you for that, Sadie. And it looks like we have Emily's hand up, and she can talk a little bit to the potential implementation activities and whether and addressing any questions that Sadie may have had.
Yeah, thanks, Stella.
Mm-hmm.
So I do want to note we just started a contract PCA did with local folks in the Winona La Crescent watershed to start chloride monitoring. So we're going to be working on that this winter. So that's something really cool that we can maybe build off of in the future in this plan. And then also focusing on MS4 work, I'm wondering if there's an opportunity to maybe partner with the city of Winona and the city of La Crescent and look at their stormwater management programs and see maybe where this program could help support those programs that they manage. I don't know if that's typical of one watershed, one plan.
Okay. Skip looks like he's just unmuted. One question that I have, Skip, before you go is
Sure.
For Sheila and Rachel, thinking about the behavior change one and how you all would express that and present that. How did you need any more information around that to help characterize that, or is the information that Sadie provided just fine for us to be able to move forward with? Has a thick influence. So Rachel and Sheila, before I move to Skip on that one.
I think just stating that's something to look into would be enough for now, definitely.
Okay, all right, perfect. Skip.
Hey, so it could be part of maybe some education and outreach to citizens in those areas. I think as part of an MS4 program, you're gonna have that education outreach component pretty well built in to your stormwater pollution prevention plan. But I know in the Zumbro, the city of Rochester is one of the partners at the table, and there will be funding available for them to be thinking about stormwater, management within the municipality, as it affects, I guess, water quality, within the Zumbro. I don't think we didn't just because they're an MS4, that doesn't exclude them from WBIF funding. if anything, we included opportunities to do capital improvement plan projects and things like that that improve water quality and whatnot. So it could be related to stormwater infrastructure and whatnot. And then I think education and outreach is always, if you're talking about behavior change of citizens and things like that, that's probably going to be one of your key components to taking that task on. So.
Okay. Thank you for that, Skip. Anyone else? All right. Next one. We are just rolling through these. Still have a number to go for stormwater.
Yeah, let me do a quick review on number that we've got remaining if folks are willing for just a time check. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, sorry, 6, 7, 8, 9 remaining. Okay. So while we're talking about this one, I'll just do a quick time check to see if we need to pivot strategies at all. But while I do that time check, I can introduce our next map. Did I just say 9 sheet or 9, Della?
I heard 8.
Oh, perfect.
That's what I heard.
All right, I'll introduce this issue. I'll do some number crunching on amount of time remaining to get through the last 8 while we talk about this map. The 2 priority issues addressed by this map are sediment loading from upland sources and excess sediment loading as a primary stressor to aquatic life, habitat, and recreation. Those are both priority A issues identified by the planning work group and confirmed by the policy committee. Again, this is one of those that's we're still pending a little bit of data. The last map that is still pending some data. The data that we're still waiting for, very similar to nutrient loading, is PTM map and SWOT loading results. However, again, very similar to nutrient loading. We've got sediment impaired streams listed on the map as well as nearly or barely impaired streams for sediment. Now looking at the map here, to bring forward, if it's fair enough, Emily, I think if we're bringing in the nutrient impaired, the macro impairments for nutrient, is it safe to say that this could be another good place to bring in the macro impairments for sediment stressor stream?
I think that's great. Thank you.
Absolutely. For sediment stressors. So we will be adding that to make sure that that's included in here. But otherwise, again, you'll see the pink is areas where there are sediment impairments categorized by total suspended solids and turbidity impairments, as well as those streams that are either nearly or barely impaired for sediment based off of water quality monitoring data. So with that, I will turn it on over to you, Della, and I'll crunch some numbers about remaining time.
Yeah, so if we go back to the 3 or 4 items that you've already identified, just so people can have a sense for what's kind of there. Is it possible to do like a split screen where you have half and half, Rachel? I know you're trying to crunch numbers, so forgive me, but it'd be nice to see the other, like zoom out a little bit to see if you can see both of them.
Let's see if I can cheat.
Okay.
I do that and that. How is that?
Well, look at that. Is that helpful? So you all can see the 4 items that are proposed with the 2 that are missing now, and then the map that actually shows the 2 layers that are already on there. We already have a note that there's going to be stressor information on sediment. Anything else as you look at this map, does it, and what's here and what's planned, would it capture sediment loading and excess sediment loading to your system? Emily?
Yeah, my eye kind of drew to it looks like the main stem of the Mississippi, like right on that eastern edge of the Crescent watershed. It looks like it's highlighted as nearly barely.
Yeah, the
I
dark.
was just kind of curious about that, if we maybe want to look at that and see what that is, or do we know what that is?
Is it possibly the fact that it's on the edge and then it's peak as well. So
Yeah, and if it's fair to well, I guess I shouldn't ask it so leading. Do you as local groups work on managing the water quality of the Mississippi River as well, or do you focus primarily on its tributary streams?
This is Sheila. I was under the impression that we just focus on the watershed. The Mississippi itself, we don't have the capacity to work with that. And I think when we did the RAPS work back in 2012, I thought that the Mississippi River itself, that water quality data was excluded from that document.
Okay.
Perfect. Thanks for that feedback, Sheila. What we can do is we can remove that as a nearly barely, since we're not bringing in the impairments on the Mississippi as a consideration, and therefore can kind of focus it on the watershed and the tributaries that lead there.
And then if I could also just have one more time for comment, could we double check the identification of Pine Creek in the La Crescent area? If you see that pink squiggly line on the southern tip there, yeah, I don't know if that's the Pine Creek that we're looking for. Might be somewhere else, but just double check that if you wouldn't mind. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thanks for
I don't, good catch. I don't think that is Pine Creek.
No, I think that's probably the end of the river at the very bottom of this watershed where the river empties. Or one of those close to it anyways.
Gotcha. And are we saying that just maybe outside of the plan area here?
Yeah, I think so.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I'm kind of in that area. I think Pine Creek kind of more straddles the Winona Houston County border, kind of just west of La Crescent. So I think that's the end of the river, like you said.
Yeah, Pine Creek is definitely within the watershed up here in the white area.
Yeah, Jason from La Crescent, I would echo what Glenn and others said, that Pine Creek is in the watershed map, and that looks like it's outside that.
Okay.
Yeah, it wouldn't.
And this is Sheila. It looks like part of the Zumbro is in there.
Yeah, we can remove that too. It might have just been shown because it spits out right here. But obviously this area here would be outside of the watershed management area. So we can just remove that as well.
All right.
Thank you all.
Jeff.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that DNR has done some real extensive work with sediment in the whitewater. I won't bore you with the whole details of everything, but the whole whitewater system was surveyed, and the sediment's been even apportioned out to sources from overland versus from the in-channel sources. So I would really encourage looking at that WARS study, it's called, and it's very detailed, but it's something we're working on because it seems relatively easy to identify where, sediment loading's happening from the land surface, but we tend to have a lack of information on where the sediment is most prevalent coming from the in-channel sources like banks and terraces and things like that. And it's, a lot of cases we've been seeing, it's not uncommon to have, over 60% of the sediment loads actually coming from the banks now and not necessarily from the land sources. So just something to keep in mind, and we're kind of putting our heads together now and looking at different methodologies for trying to assess that sediment loading from stream banks and bank conditioned in all the streams in a watershed. So it's something we're working on, and we may be partnering with PCA on that. So we'll see what comes of it. So I just wanted to mention those few things.
Thanks, Jeff. Sadie?
Hi, Jeff. I don't know, what you can use for sources for the work that you do, but Dylan Blumentritt at Winona State in the geoscience department, specializes in sedimentation. His work prior was in Lake Pepin, but he has a couple of research students every year that work in our area, and he might have something for you on maybe places to look or start with or something like that in terms of especially bank erosion.
Yeah, thanks for that reminder, Sadie. I'm familiar with some of Dylan's work for sure. And he would definitely be a good one to touch base with on this and maybe do some brainstorming. So that's a great idea. Thanks.
All right. Anything else for this sediment map and whether it's capturing and its ability to capture the issues that we have identified with upland and overland sediment loading and then excess nutrients that affect aquatic habitat and recreation. All right, so we have a few removals and a few additions or information items to consider. One of the things I think, Rachel, we might want to do is just to look at the maps moving forward.
So I was just going to suggest.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, based on time check, I think if we do a call for actions at the end for all issues as time is available, great. But agree 100% that if we just want to focus on the maps and make sure we stick the landing on that today, that'd be fantastic.
Outstanding. All right, so let us go now to the next item.
All right, so very similar to what Jeff was just mentioning, the next issue that we've got listed here, let me close out of this and make this big again, is excess sediment. This is specifically from near channel and in channel sources. So floodplains, terraces, stream banks, this is a priority B issue as established by the planning work group. And we got some great feedback already from local planning work group and partner expertise related to stream bank issues within the watershed. So I thank those who have already helped on this. We also took in some feedback from the existing Winona reps because they identified priority areas for implementation of BMPs to improve riparian corridor management and priority areas for stream bank restoration and erosion. So we took both of those information together and lit up this priority subwatershed map here. So what you'll see lit up in green and in red are the stream bank priority locations as identified by our planning work group and partners members in the MPCA, DNR, and Trout Unlimited. So those identified in green are priority stream reaches that were locally identified for protection. And those in red are those stream reaches locally prioritized for restoration efforts based on the feedback that we've received so far. But again, we're here today to get more feedback. So based off of that and based off of the outreach or the results from the previous reps, we have the map lit up here for protection efforts, restoration efforts, and areas to focus on for education and outreach. So I will turn it on over to you, Della.
All right. Any questions from anybody on what Rachel has presented in the map showing the near channel and in channel sources of erosion, and then the priority areas? Rachel, I do have one question. Sidebar from just somebody who's like color conscious. These colors are different from the other colors?
True.
And that was intentional, correct or not?
Slightly, yes. The protection is still green. The restoration as its highest priority is still red, but you are correct that we've got a new category for low priority. Difference there being is that, you know, the protection areas were still identified as kind of a high priority for protection efforts. So it's a little bit of a different way of looking at it and thinking about it. But we did create a new category for just low priority, regardless of protection or restoration for this effort.
Outstanding. Thank you for clarifying.
Yep.
So looking at this and the issue that we have in front of us, does this map capture the issues and how this group believes that it should be prioritized based on your background information and knowledge?
This is Jason from the city of La
Jason.
Crescent.
Mhm.
Just a question about Pine Creek. I know the MNPCA did a report on Pine Creek recently. I've spoke with Emily a little bit about that. And there is some of Pine Creek that is on city of La Crescent property, particularly with the golf course and other areas. And I've been working on some work with the NRCS to identify using the report from the PCA to look at if there's areas of the city property where the city could do some restoration efforts. Obviously, most of that is on private property, but that could be an area maybe that could be put in terms of restoration, particularly because it is on city property. So the city does have some more control of what could be done on some of those sections of Pine Creek.
So Jason, for clarification, are you suggesting that the area of Pine Creek within La Crescent that's on public property should be lit up as red for restoration efforts? Is that what I'm hearing, or
Yeah,
you
I
just
guess
want that captured? Okay.
I would, like to see it considered for that.
Okay.
If this group would consider that, like I said, particularly because it is on city property. Primarily that report from the PCA identified one of the biggest issues is sediment. And there's certainly are some things that the city, in our review of the section the city owns anyway of Pine Creek, that we could probably do as conservation and restoration practices that would help at least on that section of the creek in particular. It doesn't obviously change what happens upstream, but it would be a positive impact that could help particularly the sediment issue in trying to, they also identified the waters, temperature of the waters there due to possibly lack of shading, which again, something the city on that property could try and work to improve.
Okay, thank you for that, Jason. And one follow-up question about the report. What is the name of the report? Or Rachel, are you aware of the report?
I am not. So,
Jason,
yeah.
can you give us the name of the report or send it to us later through Sheila?
Emily, would you be able to speak a little more to that report?
Yeah, I think Jason, what you're referring to is the RAPS report for the La Crescent watershed.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's particular emphasis on Pine Creek, and that report outlines sediment. They've done work in measuring that at six different, I believe in the report, we're reviewing it, 6 different locations on Pine Creek, and shows changes in the sediment. And so that's the report that has that information.
Thank you.
Could also be the stressor ID report too, Della and
Okay.
Rachel.
All right, thank you. So we've got the incorporating the stressor ID report, and then the La Crescent RAPS for identifying that stressor or looking at the area that's on Pine Creek that's on public land and considering adjusting the priority level and how it's looked at. Anything else for this one for stream bank prioritization? I'm looking at near channel, in channel sources. This one is heavy on local knowledge. So if there are any additional information that you can share for inclusion, please feel free to do so. All right. Not seeing anybody unmuting or any movement in the council chamber, but that doesn't mean anything because I can't.
Della, this is John,
zoom
quick.
in. All right, John.
I think Jeff mentioned for the previous one that there might be some whitewater specific data. And I wonder if that might be relative here about the stream bank for sourcing in that neck of the woods. I'm not very familiar with it, but I can't tell if that whitewater is part of that wiggle there, is it? Okay.
Yeah, this is Jeff. Yeah, it definitely would be very specific to areas in the whole whitewater system. So that could be targeted for restoration. And I will send that report to Rachel.
All right. Thank you for that, Jeff.
Mhm.
I know when we sent the, when we applied for the planning grant, we did cite the WARS report in the appendix for that RFP as well. So, or does HEI have that report?
We do, if it is in that, I'm just checking now, but my ability to look at two screens at the same time is rough. We do.
Yep, okay, that's what I thought.
That was reviewed in the issue documentation process.
Right.
All right. So thank you for that. Anything else for this one? All right.
Alrighty.
Next issue, pasture runoff.
Pasture runoff, the need for managed grazing, that was an intentional language selection there by the planning work group. Within riparian corridors, classified as a priority B issue. And here what we did is we looked at NLCD land use, so the land use data set that covers the entire state. And we highlighted areas where there was pasture overtopping perennial streams within the watershed. So we took a 100-meter buffer of water courses with perennial streams and public ditches. And then just figured out where are there intersected areas of pasture land use and those perennial streams, and broke them into 3 different categories of protection, restoration, and restoration high priority based off of how that data and information showed up. So what you'll see here on the map in this kind of fuchsia purple are those areas where pasture land use does intersect streams within that 100-meter or so buffer of land use. So it could be opportunities to have conversations with landowners about pasture managed grazing. Based off of the concentration of that area in the sub-watershed, then we broke the sub-watersheds, which are a little bit challenging to read here and will be clarified in the future. The sub-watersheds, their underlying colors are the green for protection, meaning that there's not much concentration of pasture land near streams. Yellow for there is some pasture land intersecting streams, but not as much of it. And red, meaning there's a lot of area within that particular sub-watershed where pasture is really close to perennial streams. So with that, I will pass on over to Della.
Thank you, Rachel. As you all look at this this map and thinking about the 2 layers that Rachel has in here with the DNR streams and then the pasture intersections or intersects, does this map capture what your gut tells you is an area for the areas that should be, you know, high priority restoration, medium, or just protection areas? Is it looking relatively is it representing what you think? You looked at it and you said, yes, this is exactly what I thought. So Jeff, where are you on this, and how is this capturing that pasture issue?
Well, I'm a little bit confused because what's really the issue? Is it like the condition of the riparian corridor where there's pasture, or I'm thinking, do we overlay the bacteria impairments layer on top of this too? You know, those things got to be related too. So I'm a little confused about just what the issue is.
We do have, that's a great comment and question there, Jeff. We do have bacteria as the next issue here. It could be that, you know, this group thinks these two issues should be grouped together instead of separated out, because, you know, exactly as you're saying, Jeff, the big issue associated with pasture management is the resulting impairments in E. coli and the levels of E. coli in the stream. So perhaps if it's fair to do a double header for purposes of answering your question, Jeff, and because I love doing two birds, one stone type of things, I'll bring up the map that we've got for bacteria as well. And again, this is showing bacteria impairments and nearly bareleys, as well as results from the RAPS classification process. So here we've got the map for bacteria. What I'm gonna do is take a screenshot so we can do a side-by-side effort here too. Give me 1 second, everybody. My screenshot isn't working as kindly as I want it to while I'm in Zoom. So we're just gonna do this.
Say, Rachel, Glenn here in Winona. I'm not so sure. I mean, I think these two issues hold hands, but I'm not sure they're married to each other. I look at pasture as you're protecting the streams in those areas from being overgrazed, and then erosion along the stream bank and along with the bacteria. And that's kind of what I was assuming you're talking about, you know, sedimentation from where cattle are going through the streams in this way to manage the waterways inside those pasture areas. And, you know, pasture is a great thing to have along stream banks. But that's kind of what I was interpreting, and it's why it's a second tier priority is that, you know, it's good to have pasture in an area, but it's got to be managed. Whereas the bacteria issue is maybe correlates to your septic systems or other manure spreading from other type of livestock facilities.
Sure.
So I think they're connected, but not exactly super close together. So
I'd agree with that. I think, you know, managing pasture, you're looking, kind of helps a lot of different situations, the compaction, soil health, infiltration of water, wildlife resources. So there could be a lot of different benefits from managing pasture.
Great points. I'm just gonna jot some notes as we go in here too.
And based on the map, I think you're right on the money as far as where you'll have pasture intersecting with stream. So I think there's no need to edit that, and we can keep on moving. So.
Okay.
My one comment, and I think it echoes something Glenn was just saying, and maybe this is maybe making things a little more complicated, and it's partly a language issue, but I don't know that sort of pasture on a stream is a restoration need. I think it's an opportunity. You know, is it a restoration issue or not kind of depends on what else is around it. If you're seeing pasture in an area that's a heavily agricultural area, that's improvement over the likely alternative already, and it's just an opportunity to improve the management. If you're seeing poorly managed pasture in an area where you've got a lot of good forest natural community around it, and it probably isn't in danger of getting converted to row crops, then, you know, I don't know. I would rethink the restoration and protection language in terms of how it relates to what the map is actually showing.
Sure. And one suggestion, David, I think that's a great comment, and it's really similar to the comment that the planning work group made about labeling karst features and the concentration of karst features, recognizing that, you know, more doesn't necessarily mean restoration. More just means it's more prominent. How does the group feel about kind of following the same philosophy as we did with karst, and maybe labeling these with the same color coding so you know where the more prominent areas pop out, but relabeling those as high density, medium density, and low density? Does that help to kind of address your comment here, David?
Yeah, that'd work.
All right. Amanda?
Yeah, I just had a comment about the pasture map here. I think it needs to be cleaned up a bit. I don't know that you need the full NLCD pasture layer on there. I think you could remove that and change the pasture intersect stream to red so it pops better. Because right now that purple is just, it's blending in too much between the blue streams and then the red background some areas. So I think just cleaning it up a bit and only highlighting the areas that are intersected will help on this map.
Okay. Thank you for that. And then just to go back to Jeff's original question and Glenn's clarification, we're maintaining those two as separate maps with pasture looking at runoff from pasture and the need for managed grazing within the riparian corridor. And then the next issue is going to be specific to E. coli because it goes beyond pasture land and incorporates some other things. So keeping pasture as it is, but adjusting the map to have high density, medium density areas as opposed to priorities on that. All right, any additional comments on that? And then Rachel's highlighted, Amanda, the items that you mentioned in terms of cleaning up the map to make it better represent or better show what we're trying to illustrate with this pasture map. All right. Bacteria.
All righty, and just to kind of again do a reintroduction to this one, this is related to high levels of E. coli. Despite numerous reduction efforts and its impact on aquatic recreation opportunities. So this watershed group has been historically very active in trying to manage and mitigate impacts of E. coli. We've got a priority B. I already introduced the data layers that were thrown onto this map. So just going back to how all of that information came together here, I'll show this on the screen. Those that are impaired are shown in purple, this kind of thin purple line. Carrying over comments from the previous map, we'll make sure that Zumbro is kicked off the list here, and this lower level of the root is also removed based off of comments from previous maps. But otherwise, again, restoration high priority shown in red, restoration medium in yellow, and protection in green. I'll pass it over to you, Della. I'm sorry, one other note. We do not have any nearly barely for E. coli within this watershed. Sorry, over to you, Della.
So one quick question for you, Rachel, as you've highlighted the areas that are impaired, there are a couple of them that are impaired, but they're in yellow. Were there some discussions around why that is? Can you highlight that so the group is can't hear you?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first step of the methodology is if there was a bacteria impairment, it got characterized as a restoration medium with the rest of them moved over to protection. The reason for that is we wanted to give a little bit of an extra emphasis on those that were identified as a high priority under the Winona RAPS figure 23. So if it got both the impairment and that classification, it got moved on up.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. And I'm sure everybody else were on point on that and I missed it. Thank you for that. With this one, does it, as we were talking about bacteria before, now we're talking about it specifically looking at the impaired streams. And Rachel and her team have added the bacteria impaired waters, nearly and barely impaired, and then the Winona RAPS information. As you look at this and the data that they pull together, does this adequately characterize the issue, the bacteria issue and its prioritization? Or is your gut telling you there's a location on here that is not in one of the priority sections that you thought it should be in? I'm not seeing anybody. Oh, there we go, Emily.
So one thing that I think of is, and I don't know if we necessarily have this information, but maybe it is out there somewhere and could be based on local knowledge, but just like different areas throughout the watershed that maybe some smaller communities exist that are under sewered or unsewered.
Okay.
But like I said, I don't know if that is information that's readily available.
All right. Anything else? Any other items to include on here? All right, seeing nobody unmuting or hearing anything else, we'll assume that the map adequately characterizes the issue, and Rachel's going to check in on that unsewered area to see how that might be incorporated. All right, trout waters.
All right, and this one was a very simple process in order to light up areas of trout fisheries and habitat. The issue is essentially enhancement and protection of those trout fisheries and habitat from adverse conditions. We looked at designated trout streams, and we looked at the concentration of the trout stream length per area in the subwatershed. If there was a lot of trout streams, it got a red. If there weren't as many trout streams, it got a yellow. So nothing super dazzling about this analysis. We just love to get your input about how this is looking.
Yeah. So in terms of looking at areas, those areas that are highlighted in red and yellow, thinking about the prioritization of those as it relates to trout streams and what Rachel suggested. Any thoughts? Amanda?
Can you scroll back up so I can read the kind of title on this one?
Yeah, it's the trout.
Well, yeah, it just says trout there, but what was our priority?
The issue?
Enhancement and protection.
Yeah.
Should we add on here like the DNR trout easements as well, so we can highlight things that are already protected?
Great point. Yeah, we can certainly add in, and maybe Amanda, if it's fair, DNR easements and a concentration in order to kind of help light up priority areas. If that makes sense.
That's a great idea, and those easements too are perpetual, and they're considered a conservation easement. So yeah, it's a great way to see the protection.
Great. Thanks for that, Amanda and Jeff. So go ahead, David.
Someone who sort of fishes more extensively than I do can speak more to whether this just looks right on a gut check level. But I do wonder if just kind of density is the right metric for priority here, and whether I appreciate wanting to get some sort of like a obviously quantitative piece, but I could see this being one where the just kind of local knowledge would be a better indicator. You know, we're talking with the DNR area offices and seeing if they have like good numbers on the health of the population from their actual stream monitoring and shocking, talking with TU about, you know, either what they hear from membership, if it's the local chapter, or like some of their priority reach planning for their restoration projects at the kind of the large organizational scale.
That's just what I was thinking too. Like if they have targeted certain areas, or, you know, if they worked on certain areas that we then, you know, try to keep them as a high priority to keep them in good condition, you know, if that would be something important to add.
Yeah. I don't know if anyone collects usage statistics on stream reaches. It might be tough. But that would be another thing that the angling easements would kind of get at, because that provides access as well as habitat protection.
We're not tracking that at present, but I can tell you that I would have just about everyone on staff volunteer to help with that metric.
Thanks, David and Kate. Amanda and then Jeff.
Yeah, I agree. We need to pull in some more metrics here. And I think I was trying to get at that with the DNR easements. If there is access, obviously it's probably being used more than others. But if our target in this case here is where we want to focus future efforts for protection on. We'd want to look at where do people want to go? Is it worth fishing there? What is the current trout population? Is it impaired or not impaired? So focusing on what to protect, maybe things that are already in good shape that are not impaired in any way would be something to target.
Jeff?
Oh boy, I got several things here. Yeah, the DNR fisheries offices in Lanesboro and Lake City could really help out with, they used to have lists of, rankings of the streams under their management, from their, top priority streams down. And that could, possibly help out here. The DNR has also done several angler surveys on the trout streams, and I can get you that information, or I can point you to who to talk to, because I think that's a great idea to look at that and what the most popular streams are, the ones that receive the most angling pressure, et cetera. I think would be another way to prioritize this information too. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there with the DNR that can help.
Got it. Thanks, Jeff. Terry?
Yeah, I agree with both Amanda and Jeff about, and I know that DNR does have probably a list of potential places they'd like to focus on. And not just that, there have been some restorations that I know have been done in this watershed area, and maybe just looking at those and targeting some upland protection of those projects.
Okay. All right, Jason.
Just a comment with the trout streams, again, of Pine Creek in that report. I know that the PCA has designated that the lower stretches of Pine Creek are not a trout stream, and it was and Emily can correct me if I'm wrong reading the report, but that it was due to water temperatures. So just, again, that kind of my previous comment about that area, and at least on the city's portion, trying to improve that. And I know that it's listed as a medium priority area, which is good. So.
Got it. Thanks, Jason. We still have a few hands up. Jeff, Terry, and Jason, are you all good, or did you have additional comments for this? All right. Thank you. Lots of good information shared on this one. It looks like we'll be definitely going back to the drawing board to bring in more information to help better characterize the protection priorities that'll be for trout streams. So expect this one to change significantly based on the information you've shared. All right, next one, aquatic invasive species.
Last surface water one, y'all. So this is the presence of aquatic invasive species threatening aquatic vegetation and aquatic life. Priority B is designated by the Planning Work Group and Policy Committee. This is a similar one where the Planning Work Group and St. Mary's and HEI identified just relying on the infested waters geospatial data layer as a starting place, recognizing that there is some great subject matter expertise present on both the advisory committee and the planning work group related to AIS species. So what we have here is if infested waters intersected within the watershed, it was designated as restoration and vigilance with a high priority. And if the water, otherwise the subwatershed was characterized as a protection lower priority. We may want to change this language as well, because I know there has been some conversations with the planning work group that's coming to my mind now about where there is no infested waters we want to make sure that it doesn't spread. So maybe if it's okay, I can strike that language here now, that it wouldn't be a low. But with that, want to get and open the floor up to Della to invite conversation about this map.
Yeah, so thanks for that, Rachel. So we're gonna remove the low priority and just maintain protection for everywhere within the watershed, and then have those high priority areas. So it looks like Amanda's got a thought on how we can enhance this graphic to better show AIS items. Amanda?
Yeah, so over the past few years, I've been doing monitoring in our DNR trout streams for aquatic invasive species. So I've got a whole ton of information that never even dawned on me previously to send to you. All the areas in red are for the majority along the Mississippi, and I'm assuming highlighted because of the Mississippi River. That's something that we don't focus on because it's outside the scope of anything that we can actually take on. So
Okay.
I'm assuming that's going to be the case here for this group as well. But I will send you the shape files that I have. I also have access to what the Wabash County folks have done. I don't have access to anything in Homestead County or Root River, but I'm assuming maybe Dan would have information for down in Root River anyways. So.
Great, thank you, Amanda.
Yeah, and then as far as what to call them, I don't know that restoration or protection is something we'd be going after. I think it's more so awareness, education, and from there, I'm not sure how we would separate them, whether it's just this is infested and this is not. And then there's also the technicality of the word designated infested only pertains to a few key species like zebra mussels. It does not pertain to like curly leaf pondweed, which is in a lot of our trout streams. So there's a balance there that we'll have to kind of get through as well, but I can work with you on that if you want, Rachel.
That sounds great.
So Amanda's gonna coordinate with Rachel on updating this map to incorporate some of the data that she has from the work she's been doing. Anyone else have any thoughts on this one? All right. Well, thank you for that. Rachel, I do have flooding as another one. I don't see the map in here though. I don't see a map, so.
That's true. Okay. The flooding was as a group of issues that we want to make sure we're keeping front of mind. This relates to flooding, its impact on homes, increased drainage and tile networks, and loss of natural wetlands. We are still working with members of the planning work group in order to get some local expertise and knowledge to light up this map. So this is still a TBD map that is still under creation based off of planning work group experience and expertise. So you can expect to see this in future meetings.
Outstanding. Well, we are completely done with surface water now. So the next couple are land use and habitat restoration. And we'll do a quick time check. So we're hoping to be done with these by about 10 minutes to 4, I'm assuming. And we may be able to get through them. So
yeah, we've got
sure this group's ready to rise to the challenge. So let us go. Let's get through it.
All righty. So our rapid fire final 3 maps. First, failing in non-compliant septic systems. Again, very similar to the rationale for unsealed wells. The planning work group wanted this issue to be considered watershed wide so that failing in non-compliant septic systems can be addressed on a case-by-case basis. So for that purpose, we see a map that looks very similar to the unsealed wells map, wherein everything is categorized as important watershed wide. So I'll pass it on over to you, Della.
Wow, this is a potentially quick one, but we might have some discussion on whether or not that's the right thing to do or not. So with that, after hearing what Rachel had to say, what does your gut tell you about prioritizing the entire system as high for addressing failing septic systems or non-compliant septic systems?
I don't think it's too helpful, actually.
Okay.
This is Kate Qualley. The reason I'm saying it is, if we have a shot at sort of refining ARPA money to try to, through the counties or other entities in the future for for grants for failing systems, shouldn't we be prioritizing those areas next to, you know, that are adjacent to either pristine streams or that are have already been identified in other maps, in order to not just say, well, every septic system is a priority in every area. Areas where there's, you know, income limitations, or areas where there's known problems, such as the areas focusing around Dakota and Dresbach, where we know that the lots are such that systems might need to be combined on 2 different lots. You know, some creative solutions may be needed because of the elderly, you know, how long ago some of those lots were platted. So I feel like there's more knowledge for taking a deeper dive in this. I'm not suggesting by any means I'm the correct person, but I feel like that would be more useful for helping us to equitably target money that can help with fixing failing systems. If I just say, well, it's open to anybody in Winona County, you know, there won't ever be enough money to do that. Aren't there any kinds of things that we can add layers to, you know, economic or priority areas that we've already identified? That would be my goal.
Hey, thanks for that, Kate. Any others?
Yeah, I'll chime in here. We've bought a couple pieces of property in the last 4 or 5 years. I've put in about 3 of these septic systems now, so I got pretty familiar with the topic. But I think there's no other way other than just to classify the whole area as a high priority. I get what you're saying, Kay, but without going through and surveying every residential, rural residence is see what the state of their septic system is, you're not going to have the data necessary to target those funds like what you're talking about here. And the only way it seems like we know about that is when you have a property transfer, and then you have to go and look at the septic system. And I think it's just going to take a huge amount of money just to just a survey to find out where the non-compliant septic systems are. So best you can do is prioritize the whole area. And when you have these property transfers, then you go in and look at them. But I don't see any other way to do it. I think either way it's gonna be expensive. And if you have some funding, it's gonna be first come, first serve. When it's gone, it's gone. But at least you're doing something. You're moving in the right directions.
So Amanda, before I come to you, Kay, it looked like you went on mute. Oh.
Yeah, I hear that, and I absolutely agree. You know, it is a priority everywhere. Staff is pretty opposed to having point of sale folks be eligible, especially with the hot housing market already, saying here, we'd like to hand you 15, 20 grand on top of you're already having a hot market. I don't know. That would be part of first come, first serve. So yeah, that's a tough one. We've been noodling around about it a little bit. So those are just a couple of things. Income related was one of them, because I'm having to turn back some septic money right now because it was so income limited, as well as having to prove it was an imminent threat to public health. We're trying to join those 2 criteria up to with each individual project, and then at the end of the day I'm offering up $1,500 or something for a fix, right, Sheila? It is just not enough to help with such an expensive project. So yeah, that's something maybe some subcommittee work could be helpful for, but thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, and I just want to concur what Kay has said, because just before this meeting, I had to go in and talk to her and let her know that we have to turn some money back because it couldn't be used because Bowser, it's just the way it is that the qualifications to get those funds aren't available to everybody. And we have low income thresholds that aren't always met whenever somebody has a failing system.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that, Kay and Sheila. Amanda, and then Bonnie.
Yeah, I agree with both Kay and Glenn. It's hard to prioritize when something comes up and someone can use the funds, but also important to prioritize. And for something like this, it's difficult to prioritize. I don't know if prioritization could come down to linking it with the bacteria map, or linking it to, or prioritizing based on the septic tank as a distance from a water body or karst feature, tying it into something that it's helping protect. The hard part then is when you prioritize things like that, it's very difficult to know if they're eligible for cost share until you get on site and start working on the project. And then you're wasting technical staff time in the field on something that may not be able to, we may not be able to help with. So it's just a really tricky situation on both sides, but there are ways to target and still be able to try to help as many people as possible.
Bonnie?
Okay, thought that goes through my mind, which is not related to mapping, but related to solving some of the issues. Does anybody ever talk about the idea of composting toilets? And I know that can't work for everybody everywhere, but I think there's many places where that could work, and certainly could be less expensive than all the mound systems. You don't need to debate it now, but I wanted to get that idea out about composting toilets.
Okay, thank you for that, Bonnie.
Could I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead, David.
Could I ask a question of people who are just know this issue better than I do? How much of the barrier is people understanding their own septics, how close they are to failing, and whether they would be available for cost share or not? Like, is there an education and outreach component to this?
I guess Kay or Sheila, any help with David's question?
I would say just judging from, some of the outreach we're doing with the Safe Drinking Water Program, that there should be more of an education and outreach component put into something like this, because I would guess, in some of the places where people have lived there a long time, they may not have some of that basic information.
One of the problems too is that people that have septic systems serviced, or if they're noting a problem occasionally, they're not dealing with the county. They're dealing with individual companies that are septic companies. So with that in mind, between 2017 and 2020, we started sending out a newsletter, kind of reminding people on, how to keep things from freezing up, care of septic systems, things that they could cut and paste and send out to their customers. But we never got any input back. We asked for articles, and then during the first COVID attack, that's sort of fizzled out. Also, I was sort of mad because we were having septic inspectors poached after we got them trained up, and then I was just kind of annoyed. But the education component is huge. It's just like, how do we get to them, because we don't know when they're failing unless somebody from one of the areas we know is problematic, like I mentioned, Dresbach, it starts rolling down the street from an apartment building or something that we know has been a problem for a long time. They're upside down on payments, and that's one of the ones on our hit list if there was to be some segregation of how to prioritize. That being said, our website could use some help, and we recently had a new web provider, so we'll do our bit to try to punch things up a bit there.
And this is Sheila too. One of the things too, for us to be able to help fund septic system upgrades or fixes, oftentimes the funding source is designated for systems that are imminent threats to public health. In other words, they're surfacing sewage, and like, for example, a neighbor might report it or something like that. So that's when it gets to the county's attention, for maybe there's a chance to be able to fix this. But oftentimes, I think homeowners are kind of reluctant to disclose that they have a septic system that's not working as it should.
So considering all that we've heard and some of the comments from Kay and Glenn, and thinking about this map and its representation, just wanted to get a quick poll, and I don't know how I'm going to do that because the polling isn't working. Maybe it's just everybody that thinks we should leave it as high priority everywhere. Go ahead and raise your hands now, and people that think it should be adjusted one way or the other, don't raise your hand. And then that way we can do a quick poll on that, and then Rachel and I can think about and Sheila and the planning worker can look at how to adjust it to reflect what you all are interested in seeing. So again, one more time with the instructions. So if you'd like to see the priority levels maintained as it is with everything high priority, go ahead and raise your hand. Not raising your hand reflects that you want it changed. Okay. Does that help? Does that help? Or do you want me to, I see a hand raised in the conference room. All right.
This is Bonnie, and I'm not voting, so I'm abstaining. I don't think this is my place to vote on that.
Okay. Any others? Okay, so based on that, all right. Give it another second.
I don't think mine should be counted either.
Okay.
Oh, would it make sense just to do 2 rounds of voting? So one for.
We can. I was just thinking it would it would be simpler, because if you're not voting yes, you're not voting that. But with the 2 folks that have abstained, I think if there's any others, they can just let us know. So right now we have 4 and then 1 in the council. We have 5 and then 1 in the, well, 4 because Bonnie isn't voting, and 1 in the council chamber that voted.
There were 3 in the council chamber.
3, okay. 3 in the council chamber, 4. Everybody in the council chamber voted to keep it as a high priority as it is, plus 3 more have their hands up. Bonnie and Sadie have abstained. So the rest of the folks on the call would like some more thought to go into and some more information to be presented as it relates to the different priority areas. So with that.
It's Kagan. And I'm with Glenn. I mean, I really would like to have everything be high priority and just hand the money out. But from trying to administer it, when I know about, some place that's had some previous violations, it's having trouble, there are these special case situations that have been known to us for a long time. Just being able to nuance some of that just seemed like a good idea, but we'll do whatever we can to try to, make improvements in this category, whatever the group decides.
All right. Well, thank you for that. So with that, we'll be looking to a subcommittee to look at ways to enhance this the septic systems map.
All righty. So with that, I'm going to scroll past one of these just in the effort of time. I do not believe we have time to address annual precipitation and resiliency. Is essentially the planning work group elected to address this watershed wide as well. Okay. If it's okay with the group, I'd like to invite folks to comment via email if you would like to see adjustments to this. But if folks would be willing to spend, the soil health is still coming up, the next 2 minutes or 1 or 2 minutes on comments. We're gonna cap it off after a minute for comment for this last issue statement. So I apologize that it will have to be so quick, and we'll have to invite comments via email afterwards. But a minute or two to comment on forest, native prairie pollinator habitats, corridors, and terrestrial invasive species. The way this is lit up right now is looking at the Mississippi River Winona Watershed Landscape Stewardship Plan and Conservation Opportunity Areas. And we use that categorize in order to, or those groups in order to categorize areas as protection, enhance, and restore, using the same language that was in the Landscape Stewardship Plan. So I'm just going to open it up for about a minute here for adjustments that need to be made. And I apologize for truncating this comment period so much.
Rachel, can you scroll back up again? This is Kay. Further, a little further.
All the way up to the, the issues.
Yeah, so increased presence of terrestrial invasive species and its impact on native plant species. So where we've got, big outbreaks of in the valleys of Oriental bittersweet, or we've got big areas of Japanese knotweed, that doesn't correlate with that map.
Okay.
So the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, where they're doing tracking of known outbreaks and things, maybe that could get married to the landscape stewardship plan areas, and add another color, because those are pretty distinctive areas and in higher density. I think that would help there. Knotweed is in various locations, but sometimes there's pretty big patches of it too. So we don't want to dot every single terrestrial invasive species around, but it wouldn't hurt to be able to show where we're trying to concentrate on habitat protection and keeping things from expanding out from those areas.
Okay. Thanks, Kay. And Bonnie, I'm not sure if you just still have your hand up from the last time. So I'll go to Caitlin and then Amanda and then come back. Okay, Caitlin.
Sorry, I forgot to lower my hand.
Okay. Amanda and Emily.
Yeah, so for invasive species, like Kay was saying, they're not really being shown here. Maybe using the EdMaps mapping system, bringing in those shape files and using it as like a density in areas to help highlight sub-watersheds that could be targeted.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be good.
Thank you for that, Amanda. And then Emily.
I'm wondering if we want to incorporate a layer that kind of grays out state, county, or city-owned property, depending on how we want to target these funds, if we want them to be directed towards privately owned property or another place.
Okay.
I don't have any magic pools to deal with invasive species in Stone Point Park, where I've got a terrible Oriental bittersweet infestation that's been well out of the eye of man, as well as apple blossom, where it meets up with the city of La Crescent. So I wouldn't mind a little more help with it, because when I don't have Department of Agriculture money, I've got nothing. So I don't know about you, Emily, but so anyway, just something to think about there. Thanks.
Yeah, that's good. That's good to note, Kay. And maybe that could even be a way that we could help prioritize too.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, Terry, and then David. All right.
Oops,
okay.
That's the wrong button, but was the Southeast Landscape Plan from the Southeast Minnesota Forestry Committee, did you look at any of that information for developing some of this? I'm not sure if it would help with your map, but as far as like ideologies and.
This is just looking at the landscape stewardship plan.
Okay, I would, as far as like for some of the forestry and stuff like that, I would add in the Southeast Landscape Plan as well.
Okay.
criteria does the whole Southeast landscape plan, that I don't think that actually gets down to that granular level of mapping. I think that's more on strategies. I think that the landscape stewardship
Right.
plans were the ones that stepped it down to actually picking out geographic priorities.
Oh, for mapping. Yeah, and I was just thinking more overall for strategies.
Sure, yeah.
Or if we're trying to shoehorn two maps into doing what two different, or one map into doing what two different maps should really be doing, that could be a possibility too.
Well, and that's
No.
kind of what I was going to touch on with some of the invasive stuff is that the landscape stewardship plan was using protection, often thinking about like in the kind of legal protection from development, parcelization, or conversion sense. So thinking about conservation easement, fee land acquisition, as opposed to the more general sense of protecting natural communities through good management and stewardship, kind of more broadly, right? And so that's kind of a different issue from invasive species, at least in terms of where invasive species are the worst. So like, you know, habitat quality still matters in terms of how you want to think about prioritizing that stuff, but it's one factor along with, you know, kind of what dominates a lot of the decisions in this was proximity to existing protected lands, which is why the whitewater pops so much. I think there was some like parcel size analysis and risk of conversion pieces in there too, which is where some of the watersheds closer to Winona popped out. But that's not necessarily the same kind of criteria you'd use for deciding where you should be trying to fight invasive species. And it didn't have good data on the sort of intensity of infestations when it was developed.
So we're looking at apples and oranges here. So I think, you know, maybe we're looking at needing a couple maps maybe instead of trying to shoehorn things in.
Yeah. I'll also say for invasive species work, the kind of protect versus restore piece is, it can kind of, I think it's a really good way of thinking specifically about invasive species, but in terms of, do you prioritize the protection or do you prioritize the restoration, can get a little bit more complicated. Where in some ways it's wise to, the best thing you can do, similar to aquatic invasives, is where you know you have really healthy and important natural communities that don't have heavy invasives. The top priority should be, you know, frequent monitoring so you can prevent infestations when they're small and catch them then, versus going and throwing tons of resources at fighting the worst infestations in places. But that also, you know, it just takes slightly different interpretation.
Okay.
This is John. I'm going to definitely agree with what David said there, that in this case, maybe that protect is the highest priority versus the restore. So it's kind of backwards from other maps.
Got it.
Yeah, we kind of, the individual that was helping me with this analysis too was kind of labeled or ordered it in that way, kind of on its head, because it is an intriguing flip-flop of most of the issues. So, but it sounds like for sure important to bring in some terrestrial invasive species observations into this consideration, and if needed, break it into two different maps. So I think these are all great comments.
Well, thank you all for your time, and it's a little over 4, and I think that's the last one, Rachel. And the idea is that we're going to be sending the information related to, I believe it was the recreational, the increased annual precipitation via email, so that people can respond to that, and then the soil health one as well, that was part of land use, so we could get through the habitat and recreation sections. But thank you for your patience your ability to sit and wade through all of this information.
Heroic
Rachel.
work, everyone.
Right, thank you. Very thoughtful feedback. So thank you for that. And Rachel and Sheila.
All right. I again thank you all very much for hanging in there for such a very intense agenda item for getting through those maps. That was fantastic. And again, if you do have comments related to the resiliency one in particular, please email it to me. I can make sure that that comment gets tracked. The soil health one is still pending data, so you don't have anything to react to yet. So the only thing that you would need to email me about is that climate resiliency map. So thank you again. We did want to save a little bit of time for a We Are Water update. I know we are already at 4:06, but Sheila and John, would you mind giving just a quick update on We Are
Yep,
Water?
sure. It'll be 60 seconds or less. Just to get everybody aware that the city of Winona was awarded to be one of the host sites for the We Are Water Minnesota exhibit. It's a traveling exhibit. We do have a local piece that is in it, and it will be at the Winona County History Center, March 3rd through April 25th. And there will also be some complimentary events throughout the Watershed to tie in with that. And the whole idea is why we wanted this at this time is because it'll help hopefully generate some enthusiasm for taking action to be better stewards of our land and to also educate. And so looking for more information coming up with that.
Awesome. Thank you, Sheila. And would you like to also take, 60 seconds or so to give an update on the waterside chats?
Okay.
Happy to.
We'll be doing some waterside chats. This was done during the Zumbro planning process, and basically it will be, instead of doing a meeting for the entire watershed area like we are doing today, more focused, more regionally, focused on the Whitewater watershed, focused on the Garvin Brook watershed and things like that, so that we could have just a different way to engage with people to get their input on what priorities should be and what are some of the practices that we can use to improve this watershed, but more regionally focused. And I should say those are coming up in a couple of, we're working through that and trying to plan for those for February and March, correct? Okay.
Got it. Alrighty, thank you for those quick updates, Sheila. Thank you all for hanging on for an additional 8 minutes of your valuable time after a very, very full meeting. Really appreciate it. With that, any other next steps or conclusion items you'd like to go over, Sheila?
Nope, not at this time.
Great. Alrighty, as always, thank you for your time in helping to inform this planning process. Really great feedback we got here today, and you'll be able to see that feedback reflected in plan maps and plan action items. So Thank you again.
Yep, thank you, everybody.
Take care, all. Stay warm.
Yep, I will do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You all.
Thanks.